All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Myth Vision, old classic intro cartoon for Myth Vision. Dr. Carrier just so happened to make the plaque in the background there when all the ancient deities were summoning me to read their ancient sources. Welcome. We're going to be talking about some controversial material today, but specifically, I have Dr. Richard C. Miller, Dr. Richard Carrier, and Dr. Aaron Adair joining us here on Myth Vision. What's up, guys?
Hey.
Good to see you all. I'm excited about today's show, so let's get this out of the way here. Go to richardcarrier.info. You join his blog. It's free. Be on the updates of anything that comes out. He's writing regularly all the time. You can join the Patreon to support him as well. He has Jesus from Outer Space. We've got the physical copy here. We're doing recordings in the studio. Trying to get the introduction out of the way here because we're going to get into some weeds.
Yeah.
Dr. Aaron Adair's website as well. So you can go check that out. But you can also get Aaron Adair's book, The Star of Bethlehem. Dr. Richard C.
Which I should say is like the definitive book.
Yeah.
On this. There's a lot of books written on the Star of Bethlehem, and this is the one. If you want one on a shelf, it's got to be this one. So.
Absolutely. And me and Aaron actually did a documentary a while back covering this book. Link is in the description. Resurrection and Reception. I cannot recommend this enough because this is revolutionary on how you view the mythic fabric of all these tropes and themes that run all the way back into the Greco-Roman world and are ubiquitous in that first century period in almost all literature. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah, and it's out now on a reasonable, for an academic book, reasonable price paperback. So go get it. Like this is another one that you really want to have, especially if you're like into resurrection apologetics, even though this is not a resurrection apologetics book. It gives you tons of background information and really centers you in the actual literature and mythography of this stuff. So
it will definitely make you question some historicity here. This is the controversy here. Okay. And there's so much more I cannot cover, but I'm going to follow the lead of these giants that are joining me today. The obsolete paradigm of a historical Jesus. You couldn't get more triggering than that to someone who needs Jesus to have existed, huh? Why title it that? And we'll come to your contents here in just a moment, unless you want to keep it up.
Yeah, no, I mean, keep rolling with what you're rolling, and we can get to that when you're ready.
Okay, get the book. It's on pre-order, and we're going to get into the contents of this book today, but we're also going to, in a sense, describe the peer review process behind this book.
Yeah.
All of us have already read this book. We've already, obviously you wrote it. And we've got some things to say about how the treatment of this material
that's like everybody here, also everybody who's on screen has read the peer review reports as well. So it's not just me. Everyone here has read them. The reason I wanted to have particularly Aaron and Richard here is because they've both published in peer review within this field, articles or books, whichever. And so they've seen or know how the peer review process is supposed to look like from the inside, and they're scholars. They're not just randos, right? So like they're have their PhDs. So it matters to and then you represent like the average informed citizen on this thing. So you get the perspective of all of us. You're not just relying on my take on stuff. So that's what we're going to do. And I don't know what order you want to follow in terms of how we proceed. Or
I'm actually was going to be at your whim here on that. I just want people to know to get the books, support the scholars, and stay tuned because we're going to get into the weeds. And if you're into any of this controversy about Jesus existing, but also potentially the treatment of people who doubt the existence of Jesus. I mean, I tend to think there's more to this than just, we're just being pure academics. I think there's more to it. But anyway.
We'll definitely get into that. So let's bring the table of contents up, and then I'll explain the book. So I don't know how much I should explain, but in 2014, I published the first peer-reviewed book solely on the question of the historicity of Jesus. In almost 100 years. And Raphael Lataster then published the next one in 2019. And those are the only ones, right? And they're both argue for doubt. And that's where we are right now. We don't have a comparable peer-reviewed book solely on the historicity of Jesus question from the other side. We're still waiting for a decent, like the best case. And I've long wanted that, to be able to show, like, here's the best case against, here's the best case for, read the two books and you can decide. We don't have that yet. So this is where we're at.
Mm.
And largely the book, the original study, has been dismissed and like not even really interacted with. Even the academic treatments of it are largely ignoring the content of the book. And so it seems to be evasive. And so, but the question is, in the last 10 years, what has changed? Like, has there been any new scholarship that has reduced the probability of anything or changed anything? Has there been any new scholarship that's increased it? Whatever. What's happened? What have the formal responses been, and so on. So what I want to do is like look at the table of contents, and I'll go through like, what is this book accomplishing? The goal of it is to catch you up on what's happened in the last 10 years. It is not a book that relitigates the argument on the historicity of Jesus, really. I mean, it does that in points, but it's not really the whole study. You've got to go to the original study. The first chapter, obviously, just an introduction, and goes over what's been going on in the last 10 years, what's this book about, etc. The second chapter, largely what that does is, for people who are aware of the original study, I had chapter 4 and 5 of the original study were all on background evidence. And there were like 48 numbered background points, and there are more background points throughout the first 7 chapters. And so chapter 2 is basically, where has scholarship gone on those things? Like, has anybody since then, like, has anything changed with regard to those background facts? Have any of them gotten overthrown? The answer is no. Like, there's been no, like, all of them hold up. There's either the same status that they were when I published, or more stuff is published coming out, reconfirming and really establishing that. So I have to go through the scholarship that's happened in the last 10 years that shows that the background evidence holds up. And in fact, there's been more scholarship that you have to be aware of that's done that. And then chapter 3, I go through the formal critical responses to the book, which they're not really a lot of them, and they're not very good. And so I just basically, so this is what the critics have said, and this is what I think is what's insufficient about it, and so on. Which is new in the sense that, like, if you want to see where the state of play is, if you want to know where the debate is, it's not enough to just see what critics said. You got to see what the original author has said in response to the critics. This is it, right? That's what that accomplishes. Chapter 4, I didn't want to leave anything out, right? So I did all the other stuff, all the other arguments that have been made that aren't related to my book, so that you can't say that there's like arguments for historicity that I left out. So in the last 10 years, there've been a few like new or weird or whatever arguments for historicity, and I want to make sure I covered them all. So that's what's in there. And then chapter 5, I get into the math. So one of the things that I ran into a lot, 2 things have happened. I've learned a lot about how people have a difficulty understanding the mathematical method, and this chapter aims to answer all of those things by guiding people in to understand the method better. Mm-hmm. But also one of the things is that since I published Proving History, which is the original book on the method, a lot of historians have actually responded to that positively and have actually started using the method in other areas. So including in biblical studies. And so I cite all the scholarship that's happened in the 10 years that's actually kind of like responded to and starting to use my method. So that hasn't been ignored. It's just most historians are trying to avoid it because they hate math. So anyway, that's what that chapter accomplishes and tries to get you up to speed on that. And also explains why, and I think this is a point that gets missed in the argument, is why historians need to pay more attention to math. And they really need to like take seriously the fact that they're making arguments in probability, so they need to understand probability theory.
In that chapter, what my takeaway, because I'll be honest, I'd have to like sit and absorb and practice it, right? Because I'm not.
Most people are not really baseline prepared for even basic math, right?
But so you did say something that did walk away was like, they're all doing math and they just don't realize it. Right. And that's important that you are all doing math. When you say there was a guy, you're like, no, it's more likely it was a guy. You're literally, you don't realize math is happening right then and there. You just start.
I do this in that too. I explain, showing like, look, you're already doing this. Mm-hmm. So if you are you doing it well, or you can answer that question. You don't even know what the math is. So anyway, so this chapter 6, I apply the math. So this is one of the things I got asked a lot in the last 10 years is, could you apply it to something else? So like, you've shown the method, you've applied it to the historicity of Jesus. Could we show it like how it works on something else? And so this chapter is kind of full of that, but in the same time, it's doing a lot of other new things. So the first thing is, now I wrote on my blog a thing about the 2 swords pericope. There's this passage in Luke that has this weird thing where Jesus tells his followers to get swords, and they say they already have 2, and he says that's enough. And you're like wondering, like, why do they have swords? Why is 2 enough? That's not enough for anything. Anyway, so it's a weird story, and there's been a lot of scholarship trying to explain this strange story. And I did a blog about it. But what I did in this book is I expanded that by looking at more of the scholarship, like reading more of the scholars, bringing in more of those scholarly arguments, and looking at more of the evidence and bringing in more of an analysis of it. So it's actually a more academic and more thorough treatment of that.
Yeah.
And then I show how the mathematics comes in. And so I apply everything in chapter 5 to that example. Then I move on to the other one is
this is the good.
No, I want to get to the up there. So historical people. So the argument this is funny because this relates to the peer reviewers. I kept getting this argument that, well, if you doubt Jesus, then you have to doubt Spartacus, or you have to doubt Pontius Pilate, and it would always be some new person. And these are real scholars. Like even E.P. Sanders in the original book, I point out, said, well, there's more evidence for Jesus than for Alexander the Great. And I'm like, oh my God, like clearly we need to back up and go over like why that's a phenomenally false statement. And I did that on the historicity of Jesus, but people keep doing it. And so I have a whole chapter where I specifically apply Bayesian reasoning. I do a full one for Socrates, and I do a rough one for many other people. And I show why Jesus doesn't meet these criteria. Like he doesn't fit in this. And it was funny, the peer reviewers complained, they claimed that no one argues this. And it's like, I actually cite where where my list of the people do argue this. So that they actually tried to argue in the peer review report that I was making this up, that no one makes these arguments. And I was like, no, they're real people in real places really made these arguments. Yeah. So anyway, that was kind of weird, but it illustrates the fact that the point of the book is to address this thing because it's a new thing that's built up over the last 10 years. So this is new and important. And I go into the detail, and it builds on chapter 5 and all of that stuff. So that's important. And then here's the big one that probably one of the two biggest things that's important about this book, the two biggest shockers or whatever, the most novel contributions that have moved the ball forward is I'm talking about mythical people in third case there. Yeah.
Okay. So
the one right below it. So that is, a lot of people have asked me about the Camille Gregor team. They've done 2 articles, peer-reviewed articles, trying to challenge
them.
Yeah, right. I remember it was like a really long and hard to follow.
Yeah, there was
anyway, so I've tried to get I tried to get my reply published. The first one, the journal they published in, told me that they do not publish replies. So they get to criticize me in their journal, but I don't get to answer those criticisms in the journal. So this is an example of how like the system is broken, right? The idea that you claim to have an academic journal that doesn't publish academic disputes is, even though they published one, they're criticizing me. So that's an academic dispute where they're responding to me, but I'm not allowed to respond there. So anyway, I've had trouble trying to find anyone who will give, like, not come up with an excuse to not publish the article. It's floating around. It's actually been sitting at a journal for an absurdly long amount of time. I just haven't heard the reply back on the peer review. And I keep writing to them, and they keep saying, oh, just wait for it. It's a long peer review process. And it's like, it's almost a year. I don't know. Anyway, so that was taking forever. And so what I did is I went ahead and put basically a summary of my reply here in the book. And what I do find is that what they did in the original study is they tried to expand the criteria to include a bunch of other people.
Right. I'm going to come back to us.
We'll get, and we might get to that later. What I point out is that misses the point of what I was doing, that I was looking for a high mythology class, not a low mythology class. And so when you use the correct method that I actually used, what they did do is they did change something. They changed my mind about something, is that Alexander the Great, Mithridates of Pontus, and Apollonius of Tyana should be in the set. And in the original study, I said they shouldn't. I had reasons and so on. They made a good empirical case to say, yeah, actually, you're strong on that. Like, those should be back in.
Yeah.
And so the question is, okay, how does that affect all the math? Like, what happens?
Yeah. The priors and all.
Yeah. The iron, and what I show here with correct mathematics is that, ironically, they've reduced the probability that Jesus existed. And if you want to understand how that works, you can go and look at the chapter and see. But what they've done is they've greatly narrowed my margins of error, right? So that, like, I usually had a really low bottom margin, and my top margin was like 1 in 3, right? And what they've greatly reduced that. So the top margin now is 1 in 4. So there's best odds on Jesus existing is 1 in 4, thanks to their results, which is not the result that they wanted to produce. So if you want to see why that is, this is a really new and important thing, because it changes a conclusion in my book. Now, it doesn't change it radically, because I said, like, these are margins of error. The probability is somewhere in there. So all they did was show that I was right, that the probabilities are somewhere in the tolerances that I gave. All they've done is narrow the tolerances. Okay, so then we get to Docetism. This is chapter 7. This is this I think is the most important one, and the one that I most wanted to hear peer review response to.
Right.
And the peer reviewers almost completely ignored it. We'll get to that later. Like Aaron has some thoughts about this that I think are great, but they pretty much just blew past this. And this is probably literally the most important chapter of the book, and an important contribution, because I did two things here. In my original study, I said Docetism, I'm not sure Docetism existed. I think that might be an artifact of modern scholars. They've invented this. And that when you get rid of it, the evidence starts to change. And maybe we're looking at evidence of mythicist Christians. Now, in my book, I said, well, I haven't done a deep dive on this. I don't know if that's true. And I just offered it as a possibility and moved on. It wasn't a part of my argument. Now, since then, I've done a deep, thorough dive. I've read all the scholarship in the last 10 years on Docetism, and all the experts in Docetism studies, like literally every publication that discusses this particular aspect of it, all of them agree that Docetism probably didn't exist. That this is a modern scholarly artifact, exactly like what I thought, right? And what they do is they drag the ball almost like one step short of where I am on this, right? And so what I do in this chapter is I cite, I quote, and discuss what these scholars have argued. And there's a ton of them. M. David Litwell is even one of them, which is interesting for those who are familiar with past drama. But what I do is I do that, and then I do a thorough analysis of I do a reanalysis of all the primary evidence, so all the passages that are supposed to be proof of Docetism. I go back and relook at them now that we've abandoned the field, not me. The field has abandoned the idea that this is Docetism. I've gone in and done it and re-looked at everything with new eyes. And what I end up with in this chapter is that I think we have a ton of evidence of mythicist Christians, Christians who are doubting the historicity of Jesus. And I think that's important. It doesn't affect the probabilities of historicity because this is all second century evidence. It's too late. But for anyone who thinks, like, well, we should have evidence of the deniers, I say, well, I think we do. We have a ton, and we've been ignoring it because scholars have been stuck in this paradigm of misinterpreting the evidence along the lines of Docetism. Anyway, so that makes that chapter really important. And I even do like a redo of the Greek translation of Ignatius that I think is important. And they made no comments on it, basically. So then the last chapters, I can breeze through this really easily. I just do the three passages: Romans 1:3, Galatians 4:4, and Galatians 1:19. Really, I talk about where is the state of play on this. So like the original argument, where is the argument? What are the critics said in the last 10 years? Why are they wrong? And then there's new publications in all of these. I've got a ton of new studies on Brothers of the Lord that actually back a key premise that I use. So a lot of scholarship has moved in my direction on this. And same with the other passages, including Romans 1:3. There's been a new study that I use that I cite in there that shows that reinforces my point. So anyway, a lot of scholarship has changed in the last 10 years that actually is pushing things in the direction I was already in. Mm-hmm. And so then I analyze stuff and I go through the logic and everything, all of that. So that's what these chapters are for, basically to carry the ball further and to show you how far the ball has carried since I published originally. So the book is all full of new stuff and important stuff, and is crucial for anyone. If you really seriously want to debate or explore the historicity of Jesus, this book is now required because it's the only way to get you up to speed on where we are on this. And no one else has published anything like this. So that's the point of the book. That's my quick summary of it. I don't know if you want to ask everybody for their impressions.
Yeah, look, I'm glad you took the time.
I'm going to start with a bourbon here. So,
Dr. Miller, Dr. Adair, if you guys would like to come in with whatever you feel you'd like to start with, comments, anything.
I pass to Aaron. Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, so let me first just get my throat ready. Yeah, all right. Yeah. Yeah, I have some other bourbon here as well to help me chug things along. Okay, so I just went through the reviewer again because I wanted to make sure how much did they talk, especially about that chapter on Docetism, because to me, it was the most glaring example of, at best, rage reading, because I looked at it and they basically say Richard has mixed up what Gnosticism and Docetism is as if it's one thing, and there's like no engagement with the secondary literature, just citations of primary literature. So first off, what's the problem with citing primary literature? And two, I checked. There's lots of citations and direct quotes of the secondary literature, folks. It's like you can't say you read that chapter and make those statements and just skip the entirety of what one, the fact that actually Richard is citing all this stuff, two, shows it basically agrees with him, and three, it kind of messes up the whole paradigm otherwise, and it's just completely walk past as if it's not even there. It was one of the most galling things from the reviews, among other things, that caught my eye.
Yeah, I think that stunned me, where they're saying you're not citing the secondary scholarship. I literally cite all of it. Like everything that's been published in the last 10 years on this is discussed, and it actually carries the ball forward. So this is new. I think I didn't know this stuff. I didn't know Docetism studies had moved in this direction. So obviously scholars need to know that this has happened. So that's important. But then, they complain. So they complain that I don't cite scholars. When I do, I cite, quote, use, fully document all of that. But then they complain, like you said, that there's too many primary sources. like, are you serious? Like, this is so these are the kinds of objections that were coming up in peer review. They're very illegitimate. This is not like a serious peer review. These are like specious reasons to reject the thing. That they're not valid. Anyway, so that was a good example of that, where they blew past it, and they gave, I don't know what, 2 sentences maybe at most.
At best, 2. The third sentence might somehow connect to the rest, but like I say, the fact that they said you confused Gnosticism and Docetism, the best I can think of is in that chapter you say, in the same way the category of Gnosticism seems to be in many ways modern invention, so might be Docetism. And the only way you would not get that... The only way the reviewer could not get that is by not carefully reading and just saying, here are words, I'm angry, I'm seeing words. No, that's true, because what I do is I draw the analogy. This is another thing that's happened in the last 10 years, is that Gnosticism has been abandoned. So the field has agreed that Gnosticism was a fabrication of modern scholars. They're actually, and the peer reviewers seem to not be aware of this or to understand the point, because they tried to argue, but you can't say the demiurge didn't exist, or they argue for the demiurge. Like, that isn't what we said. I don't know how you got that. That's another example of the rage skimming, where they're not paying attention, because I even specifically say, this does not mean that there wasn't a demiurge. Like I literally say the thing that they claim that I didn't say as a reason to reject the book. So it's very, they do that a lot. This isn't the only example, but they do that where they say, like, that doesn't mean that. I said that myself. I said it doesn't mean that. But what I do is the analogy is like Gnosticism got basically tanked by realizing that it was a modern construct. And this is a mainstream conclusion in the scholarship. And I cite tons of scholarship on this. And so Docetism is going the same way. And so I use it as an analogy, like, this is what's happened here. The same thing is happening with Docetism. And then I go through the Docetism literature. So I'm not confusing them. That was a weird critique for them, which, like you said, it indicates that they're not really reading the chapter. They're just rage skimming, and they're trying to come up with reasons to get rid of it, which is not like a legitimate professional way to peer review a book.
If I may chime in here, I want to get Dr. Miller here to give a why he's here. But first, he has a book coming up, nowhere near a draft. Well, and then I want to hand the torch to you, Dr. Miller. From the start, you say, Christians built him entirely from mythic stock, conceived like a demigod, washed by a divine spirit, speaking in superhuman riddles, working theurgic healings and exorcisms, executed as a mythic ritual symbol, then translated and lifted into heaven. Strip away those fables and nothing is left. No caption ever read based on a true story. Dr. Miller, why are you here? What makes you, why are you at this round table, and from your own voice, from your own perception?
Yeah, I've been in this discussion for a little while. Some folks on your that will frequent your channel might have heard some of my past comments, and very passionate about this, because I feel like what's at stake here isn't just the work of a fellow scholar. Richard Carey and I are good friends. Aaron and I growing into becoming good friends, and Derek, you and I have been friends. But I feel like there's something more at stake here than just our friendships and kind of trying to defend one scholar to another. What's at stake here is just secularity in our field generally, just the dignity of being able to publish in let me just hold my cards out and let everybody see what I'm saying here more clearly. I think there's only 2 really valid secular positions to take on this question. And I don't feel like the center of mass in our field even closely represents that to the world in terms of what we're not, as secularists, we're not under the The narrative of Christian origins, what we describe, the description is not under the control of secular scholarship. And so now I think the only two reasonable options here is that he was a whole cloth mythic invention from the beginning, just as that quote might suggest there. And the other one is that there's not enough there. Yeah, there was a guy, but there's not enough there to really determine the narrative in terms of what we're getting in the New Testament. The nuts and bolts that are holding this thing together in the New Testament, in earliest Christian constructions, writings, literature, occultists, communities, the nuts and bolts holding it together are mythological, not historiological. And so to me, so what's going on then in the universities? And so we've got a field that the center of mass, as I said, is largely people trained in seminaries, divinity schools, the bag of questions that are inherited from prior generations, all arrive from this kind of idea, this paradigm that everything arose from a historical kernel, a core that's there, and kind of built almost like a cake or a kind of a fish story or something like that on top of that. And that is to be an unquestioned kind of essential starting place for everyone. And what Richard's presented is an external challenge to that paradigm, that fundamental paradigm. And I think there needs to be space for that, discursive space. I want to see, 100 more Richards out there. I want to see an army of people that are championing that view. Those should be the only two views that are on the table. And there shouldn't be this huge, it could be a friendly debate, but it shouldn't be this toxicity that we find in, for instance, this unprofessional review, or the set of reviews that I read that Richard shared with me. And so the gatekeepers, the publishing houses, the culture, et cetera, they might be uncomfortable with what's being brought here, but this is real research. The idea here isn't to be custodians of modern faith or Western sacred history. It's to share with the world what our best, most illuminated kind of research would bring to bear on these topics. And, if you want to read that, this is where you get that. But the idea that we have to exist then as myth critics on the margins, as outlaws and desperados, and have our work, so heavily scrutinized. Meanwhile, the gates are wide open for all sorts of nonsense that's being published and flooding the libraries and bookstores and Amazon and so forth in our culture today that are all faith friendly. It's basically the West, as I've said, funding the academic legitimation of its own mythosystem. And so that's what's going on. I think it's a travesty. I think biblical studies is defunct over this. I think that university departments need to be hiring real secularists and not people that are in orbit around faith communities and writing fuzzy, nice, negotiating kind of work that's meant to coddle Western sensibilities or sensitivities around Christian belief. That can go on out in the popular culture possibly, but when you get to university, academic, serious publication, Richard's one of the most highly qualified people to talk on this topic. He went to two of the best programs in the world. And the idea that he's being met with just this onslaught of ridiculous aversion, I think needs to stop. And so I'm here to stand with him. You fight him, you're fighting me. So, yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me. So reiterate, everyone here on this panel has read the peer review reports and the book. And so I'll just lead with this question is like, does anybody have any examples of when the peer reviewers found any specific error of fact in the book?
I don't think so. I don't think there's like an error of fact.
Yeah.
It seemed more like they just disagreed.
That's right. Yeah.
And therefore, I don't recommend this book because of rhetoric or because of it sounds like online debate stuff. And by the way, that tells me they know you from prior. That's why I think it's bias against you, because it's like, hold on, it's blog stuff.
I do think there's been an all hands on deck movement behind the scenes to try and cancel me.
Yep.
Because when my first book came out, I think everyone was surprised. And what happened was then there were a lot of attacks on my publisher, my original on the History of Jesus. They got attacked a lot, denigrated and belittled, and all kinds of pressure was brought to bear.
Questioning their validity as a good
exactly. Yeah. They think they faked the peer review and all of this stuff.
Yep.
It's all false. But that was that I saw that, and then I saw I've gotten clues and other evidence that there are people working behind the scenes trying to get me canceled. So I know, for example, there's a fatwa against me at the Journal for the Study of the Historical Jesus, where they've just basically said we will never publish anything by Richard Carrier, regardless of what it says.
Yeah.
Right. So,
you could become a historicist, and they probably wouldn't.
No, they would totally do it then, right?
True.
No, but anyway, this policing exists. So I think that by the time I was publishing now, there's this we have to stop this attitude within the guilds, right? And so I think that's what happened here. That the two peer reviewers clearly had it in for me and couldn't come up with any actual specific error that I needed to correct or that undermined anything that I said. They just had to invent reasons to nix it, and they're all dumb reasons. We gave the example earlier of that, but we'll get to more examples maybe as we go along. But they're not. It just struck me as very unprofessional. This is the other reason I wanted people here that Aaron and Richard have seen peer review reports. We know what they're supposed to look like. This is not what they really are supposed to look like. These are almost like childish email screeds. It was very strange.
They're very upset at you. You can tell there's an anger tone.
Yeah.
And they're bitter. They don't like what you're saying, and they're exaggerating in their language toward you. My personal perception is that when you make a statement nothing new, there's nothing new, and this is not going to be interesting in the field. First of all, you somehow are omniscient on the field's knowledge of what would be interesting.
You're talking about them. They're saying
in the peer review about why they're denying the book.
Yeah, there's nothing new in the book,
which is bullshit.
It's totally false, wildly false. And it's too colloquial in style, which I don't think is the case. It's as colloquial as any. Bart Ehrman's forgery and counterforgery has just as much snark in it as I do, right? There's tons of peer-reviewed books that have the same kind of colloquial approach in terms of language. I'm not being it's not an internet language. This is an academic language book, but it is popular language.
They could have said, if they really felt that way, it was snarky. They could say, tone the snark down.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's for my original book on the historicity of Jesus, that was one of the notes I got from the peer reviewers. Is that they said they identified one sentence in the book. And they said, this is too strongly worded. You can say the same thing in a more balanced way.
Yeah.
And I was you're totally right. And so that's usually with peer review reports, you get this is good, but you need to meet these requirements. You need to do these. They have a revision list, these things. If you can meet these requirements, you pass. And almost always you get that, right? And it almost always makes your article or book better, right? I countless cases where that's the case. And this is an example. Here's this one sentence. It was the only one that I had a problem with. I think that you could reword this. And they were very specific. And I was you're absolutely right. And so I reworded it, and that's what went to press, right? So that was a competent professional peer reviewer, where these guys were constantly making generalizations, would never give examples, right? Oh, you're using too colloquial language. Well, what do you mean? What's an example? There was the only example they gave was you use the phrase "of course" too much. But they didn't give an example of it being inappropriately used. They just claimed it was inappropriately used somewhere in the book.
Or that you started your sentence with which. Or something
that's also funny because that's actually grammatically valid. There was a lot of this. There was a peer reviewer who flagged multiply as an adverb because they clearly didn't understand that multiply can be an adverb. So they thought that they thought it was a typo. They said I said multiply. I can't remember what it was, but it was. Something happened multiply often, right? Whatever. That's not how I worded it, but they clearly flagged it as if they think it's multiply, right? The verb, right? They didn't understand. Clearly this is bad language, and it's freaking Google multiply. It's an adverb. It's in the freaking major dictionaries. It is a word. So there's that which starting a sentence with which is totally legit, but they sort of grammar policing is just dumb stuff to do, and they're even wrong. That was the other thing. It's to try and nix a book for bad grammar when you're the reviewer's the one who's got the grammar wrong. It's kind of very ironic, I guess.
Well, just publicly, I want to let Aaron and Richard maybe give examples or go wherever you guys want. I want to just say, because I know Carrier was going to say this, Richard was going to say this. I said Carrier just so I differentiate.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is if you're one of the publishers or one of the peer reviewers, and you are watching this video, we encourage you to make public or turn it into an article. I don't know, something, because
actually, no, this is important. So after I got these ridiculous reviews, well, first of all, the publisher didn't want to show me the reviews. So I had to say, can you at least show me the reviews? And so then they showed me redacted reviews. And I was like, why did you redact them? They said, well, the part that we showed you is all the stuff that has to do with facts, supposedly. And we cut out stuff that has to do with tone. But first of all, why did you cut it? Okay. And a lot of, there's ellipses and things that make me worry that in the hidden stuff they didn't show me, there's ad hominems, maybe threats against the publisher, right? So I don't know what's being concealed. But anyway, the publisher claims that what they showed me is all the fact review, right? Which has no errors of fact identified in it. But what I then said is so I would like to make a request that can we do this open review? Can we have the reviewers, would they let us publish it? The publisher could publish it, they could publish it, whatever. I want the reviews public so that people could make their own judgment about are these critiques valid or not? Can we just publish the critiques? And what the publisher told me, and of course I don't know who the reviewers are, and I didn't communicate with them directly. The publisher told me they said no, that the reviewers themselves refused to let the public read the peer review reports. So whether that's the case or not, I have asked for them to be published. So I would like the peer reviewers to publish them. I would totally accept what you're talking about. If they want to publish a critique or whatever, that's fine. But what people want to see is what was actually the sort of, I want to say, unprofessional stuff that's in the reviews. They should publish it. And I totally approve that they should publish it. So the only people who are keeping you, the audience, from seeing these review reports are the reviewers themselves. Are the only ones who don't want you to see them. And I think you should get to see them, because everything that we're talking about here is really important, especially to what Richard was talking about before, which this illustrates to me that the field is captured by Christian ideology. And you can tell one of the reviewers seems to be hung up on the virgin birth theory, they seem to be pro virgin birth or whatever. And you're thinking why is that in the peer review? But anyway, it is. I really strongly think that if they're not Christians, they're definitely secularists who are batting for Christian colleagues or something. It seems very pro-Christian, the reviews. But anyway, that ideology is policing, like Richard said, is policing good scholarship just because it's too offensive to talk about certain things. They don't like the arguments. It's not that there's factual errors, or they can't identify fallacies. They can't come up with an objective reason. They just think it's dangerous or bad or whatever. And so they're opposing it. And that's the attitude that's going on. It's gatekeeping rather than professional peer review. And that was my impression. And I'll ask everyone who's read everything, do you think I'm wrong? Am I misreading?
Let me also come in with my perspective, because I have the benefit of not just publishing in biblical studies, but also in physics and popular culture studies. So I've seen different areas of the sciences and humanities and the review process. I've even been a reviewer for books and articles. So I've been on both sides of it.
Yeah.
And
so have I, peer reviewer as well.
Yeah. So, this is just night and day from what I'm used to seeing. I've, worked in publishing science articles and things like that. And we get responses from the reviewers, and they'll say, I wish you would consider these things. I think this is erroneous. I think this is a source you need to be incorporating, etc. And sometimes, some reviewers are really going line by line. Here are the things that need to be changed before I'm willing to accept such and such for review. There's usually not tone policing, though. With a physics paper, it's usually tone is not so much the problem.
Yeah.
There are some exceptions. I've seen some bad physics papers saying you should believe me, and we're like Galileo being suppressed, but those are the exceptions.
Yeah.
And cranks. People that still trying to deny the Big Bang, for example. But that's another topic for another day. But nonetheless, the way you usually see this thing is saying, here's something that's wrong. Here's the reasons it's wrong. Here are the sources that should be cited, or here are the things that are factually wrong. Here's what would need to be fixed at minimum before it could be reviewed or otherwise rejected. Right. And I've only straight up said such and such article needs to be completely rejected because it doesn't meet standards. And I still have to say, here are the things that are deficient. Clearly, that's not what this review was. That is so far away from the norms that I've seen. And like I say, literally 3 different areas of academia. So
Yeah.
this is not just abnormal in biblical studies, it's abnormal for scholarship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was atrocious. You know, a real shit bag of. It wasn't even advice, really. It was just It was like toxic vitriol in some way.
Yeah.
Just some guy. I'm just imagining some guy at his keyboard, just I don't know, whacking off and typing and getting angry, and I don't know. It just did not strike me as anything even approaching or resembling something professional. I don't understand why the publishing house went ahead with that and said, okay, yeah, this is what we're wanting to see happen in our review process.
Yeah,
it happened twice, which is really, it kind of suggests that the publisher themselves is not making the best decisions. They should be picking someone. I understand that maybe, let's just say, my work or your work or Aaron's work or whatever, or whoever's work might not be everybody's cup of tea. Okay, fine. That's okay. Let's pick some reviewers, though, that at least are, sympathetic to new theories coming into the field. We're theorists. We're writing new stuff that's, going to break paradigms and challenge some of the status quo. And so,
literally in the title, right?
Yeah, you should have somebody there that's trying to be helpful in that kind of enterprise and giving helpful feedback. Yeah, it's okay if it's a little bit, they don't have to coddle us.
That's right.
But and they don't even need to accept everything that we're trying to publish everywhere. That's fine. But the idea that we should be treated with dignity and respect, though, and our ideas should be handled with a kind of professionalism that befits the stature of, the work we're putting into this. And so it's a thankless job. I know in Hollywood they can't make enough of trophies to give each other for their achievements and so forth. In this field, it's not a friendly field. It's not nice.
Yeah.
The people in this field are not, collegial for the most part. They're not. There's a lot of toxicity in this field, and I like to see camaraderie. I like to see collaboration. I like to see us, driving each other to greater heights of brilliance and celebrating one another's contributions. And there's plenty of room for theorizing here. And he's the most formidable advocate for the mythicist position right now that's living. And he needs to have a good stage to be able to present that. And we need to invite more people onto that stage. And so,
yeah, I really, especially I generally value peer review reports in terms of they always improve the work, right? So I was hoping for that, right? The book would be even better, but then they couldn't even identify anything that was really genuinely bad with it, right? It was all false statements about what's in it, or they're trying to litigate some sort of Christian apologetic position, or things that don't belong in there. But you had mentioned the publisher. I want to say that we are deliberately not naming the publisher. I don't want it to make it about that. I can confirm that it is a significant biblical studies press that has published major scholars. So it's not like some random weird publisher. Also, I'll point out that I have actually been through another peer review process with a different academic publisher in a different field, not biblical studies, where I got a response that was completely patently bogus. And I told the editors, they're literally making stuff up, and so the editor said, well, look, we're bound by these rules that we can't just reject a peer review report. We, the editors, agree that peer review report is bogus, that the thing is they're making that up. But we don't have, our procedure is that you have to resubmit with a new peer review process, which might take a year. And so I said, I'll forget that. Why should I bother with that? If that's just going to keep happening over and over again, it becomes a way to police you. So you keep trying to get through and they keep blocking you. They're trying to drag this out. And I think the timeline, so this took 6 months, the peer review. And I had to write in and say okay, come on, what's going on? The peer review report. So the peer review response only came a week after I started complaining 6 months later. And then they didn't give me the reports. And I said, well, okay, can I see the reports then? And so that took it was a week later, for dragging, I don't know why, a week later, then they sent me the report. So it was a very shady process. But the idea that like the editors usually can't just reject peer reviewers because they're under this they have this system of rules they have to follow. The rules are arbitrarily rigged to make it easy to gatekeep. So it makes it easy for peer reviewers to nix projects and to make it impossible to get around that. Some journals have procedures that are better than this. And I've dealt with that where I've had, look, these peer reviewers are fraudulent. The editor says, yes, they are. And then they get different peer reviewers and they do a turnaround really quickly. And I've had that happen. And so that process can work, but you have to have rules that actually make that possible. And so what happened here is like I could have turned around and tried a different academic press, right? And gone through it all again. And then what would they do? The peer reviewers would drag their ass and not doing anything until try to wait me out, right? Like wait 6 months, a year, whatever, like what's happening with the article on the Gregor piece. And then what? I've got either pull it or they'll reject finally when I start complaining. And then I got to start over. And it takes years and years and years to get my book published because I have to wait until I find someone who will ask an honest peer reviewer to peer review the book. So rather than do that, that's why I said, you know what? The peer reviewers found no errors of fact. I've been peer reviewed. Like they had every opportunity to find something wrong.
But that's the point I brought up. I forgot a long time ago. I was mentioning him because I don't know much about this peer review process. I mean, I'm a layperson here. I've never gone through it.
Yeah, you've never seen it. Yeah.
Never seen it, right? This is the first time I've read something that came out. And I hope, the process sounds and looks better than this for most people.
It usually does, yeah.
Yeah. But my biggest complaint, and I talked to Carrier on the phone because I'm like, look, I tend to think there might be a guy some days, and sometimes I don't know, right? I mean, I really don't know. And I'm like, so what if they disagree with the fact, like the peer reviewer themselves thinks there was a Jesus, but they're reviewing? How does that work? And Carrier's like, that's fine. They can accept that they think I'm wrong about my conclusion, even if I'm factually correct about the data. My interpretation at the end of the day may be different than theirs. And they think, and I was like, oh, interesting. So technically you could have historicists.
Yeah. And some journals and publishers have actual forms. So they try to police this kind of behavior. They have actual mandatory procedures for the peer reviewer. So you have to actually answer, the peer reviewer has to answer specific questions. They have to write paragraphs according to certain rules. They can't just write random screeds like this. Not all publishers have this, but I know some do because I've gone through the process, even as a peer reviewer myself. And so that actually restricts, it forces your peer review to be more productive. And it also, often they say that you have to, in the peer review, you have to correctly summarize the chapters. Which means it kind of forces peer reviewers to actually read the book, which I think these reviewers didn't really closely read the book. But anyway, so there are these procedures for that.
But one of the things they didn't realize docetism brought forward something new. They literally say there's nothing new. They're like, it's weird.
There's even the whole Gregor thing. There's tons of stuff that's new.
Yeah.
And all of all the advanced, what's happened in the last 10 years on the background knowledge, even though that's kind of trivial, it's minor stuff, it's still new and it's important and it is therefore newsworthy, right? It's reportable. But anyway, so the thing is that on those more systematic review processes, they're very explicit in saying that you do not have to agree with the conclusion. The point of it is can you find any errors of fact? Are there any they don't use the word fallacies, but they'll use something is there any can you specifically identify a methodological, an invalid method used or something like that? And so they hone them in on that. All they want to know is look, is there something egregiously bogus about this? And for people who are interested, I'm about to publish, it's going to drop tomorrow, my own critical review, well as it aggregates mine with a bunch of other people's, of the Schmidt book, which is the new Josephus thing that's come out. And that'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about in terms of what we're supposed to actually look for. It's not that I disagree with him. It's that he's making fundamental, identifiable, specific errors that I can identify and show are errors, right? So that's what a peer review report would look like normally. Now I'm much more elaborate because I go into detail. And a peer review report, I'd be very curt and specific, item by item. It would be more concise, but it would be the same things that I would point out. These are serious errors. I don't know if they're fixable, right? And I did that also when I did Earl Doherty's book. If people go back ages back, I wrote an article. People when I was a historicist, I actually was a Jesus historicist and rabidly anti-mythicist. So people forget that because it was early in the internet. Not a lot of the receipts have survived, but that was the case. And people importuned me, people whose judgment I trusted, said, you need to read Doherty's book because it's not as crazy as the other stuff. And so what I did is, okay, I'll read it. And what I did is I wrote what would be similar to the advice, like what I would write up if he was a graduate student and I was his advisor and this was his dissertation. I would say, this is what I would write to them to say, if you want your dissertation to pass, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
And like, here's the things I think are errors. Here's the things I think are good. Here's the things that I think you can fix. I think you're close. Like, you can do this. Right. And so if you want to read that, that's very similar. Like when I got like for my dissertation advisor, same thing, like chapter by chapter, they say, here's some things that you could do to improve this, etc. So like peer review is very similar to what you'd go through when you're getting a PhD, when you have your advisors and you have your dissertation committee. There's multiple members of your dissertation committee. You're all doing the same thing. They're all like critiquing every chapter and saying, here's how to make it pass my judgment. Right.
Right.
None of them are agreeing with you. That's not the point. The point is, are you using the methods? Are your facts in line, etc.? Like, does this look like what we want to stand by in terms of, this is good scholarship? I don't agree with the conclusion, but I agree with at least the approach.
And they might agree or they might not, but they don't have to.
Also true. Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's also true. But anyway,
It's the same in the sciences as well.
Both on both sides of this, as a peer reviewer and as a recipient of peer reviews. And it doesn't look like this. Like this was kind of ridiculous.
I was going to read it, just a spot, if you don't care.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's the end of one of them, and it's like it stands out. Like, it's clearly doesn't sound like they're interested in coaching or giving encouraging like critique.
Yeah.
They're done with you from the first sentence of this entire thing.
Yeah.
And this is the last sentence or the last paragraph. It is nothing new to critique earlier trends in historical Jesus research, such as criteria of authenticity, older views of orality studies, treating John as an independent witness, taking polemical and theological texts like Gospels or Acts at face value, etc. This is what historical Jesus researchers do all the time. I can hear the tone, right? In fact, they've done it much more carefully and critiqued much more harshly and aptly than this book has. But they don't jump from finding a flaw in a method or noticing previously unnoticed presumptions or realizing that sections of the Gospels are fabricated all the way to therefore Jesus didn't exist, which is so not tracking what you're saying. No. You're not saying, oh, I found a fictional.
It's not my argument. No, they're not correctly describing your argument.
I found fictional pericopes, therefore he didn't exist. Like, it's far more elaborate than this.
It's not the argument. It's not in the book.
Right. Finding flaws in previous Jesus research is not the gotcha this book thinks it is. Our historical evidence for Caesar Augustus, Judah the Maccabee, Queen Salome, Alexandra, Peter, or Beruria are all biased, embellished, imperfect, derivative, trope-laden, and polemical too. This doesn't mean the figures didn't exist. Heck, there are millions of ancient people we don't have any evidence for at all. They too existed. The whole idea of the book is anachronistic at best and anti-Jewish at worst. That's an accusation.
Yes,
wild.
It is.
Because in order to posit that Jesus didn't exist, it's necessary to be completely ignorant of Second Temple Jewish concerns, apocalyptic Judaism, the Jewish tensions and ups and downs from the Maccabees to the Herods, all of which make Jesus, A, make perfect sense, so much as B, be almost boring. The effort is wrong-headed and quixotic. Chaotic. Okay, it's like a weird. Okay, and just barking up the wrong tree. And just my comment on that is like what Miller's comment was, and it's like no one is that heavily mythologized on that level, except like usually mythical people. And anyway,
that's especially funny because I have the whole section. This is another new thing that's in the book is I do a Bayesian analysis of the historicity of Apollonius of Tyana, which hits all of these points, right? I'm explicitly making all the points that they're claiming in that paragraph you just read that I don't make. No, I literally say all that same stuff in there. So like, it's not even a legitimate criticism of the book because the book actually addresses all of that stuff. It says exactly that. But you can tell the sort of like they're under identity threat. They're like terrified of this result. And they're like doing this sort of like screed, this sort of, it's disconnected from my argumentation because it's not even correctly describing my argumentation. It's misattributing things to me that are not true. And then when they did the anti-Semitic thing, it's like they're saying, because you can't talk about this without, whatever Second Temple stuff, but they don't give an example anywhere in the whole thing. They don't give an example of like what, like I thoroughly center everything within Judaism, like thoroughly, like every chapter I'm like doing, this makes sense within Judaism because, and I give like extensive scholarship and citations and stuff. So there's no way that you could say that I'm ignoring the Jewish context, right? So like if you're saying I'm ignoring, like, is there something about Jewish context that I'm ignoring that changes a conclusion in my book? Tell me what it is, right? Like they never say, they never give an example. They just say this, like, well, you really need to know more about Second Temple Judaism. It's like, do I? Like, can you give me an example? Can you cite a page where there's something that's relevant? And that's the kind of that's really characterizes the whole. Both reviews actually are written like that. They're in that same sort of colloquial shit kicker tone. The same sort of dismissive, like ignoring the actual contents of the book. Claiming it doesn't have things in it that in fact it has, like all of that kind of stuff. It's very, very typical.
And the other reviewer is even more scathing than that review. Anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's even more, I would say, childish, but yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's how Richard and Aaron, what's your take on all of that? Like, am I going too far in my rant there?
I don't think so. In fact, one of the things that Derek had read had reminded me, because when the reviewer was complaining that what you wrote was anti-Jewish, I just pulled out my copy of this book by Niels Peter Lemke about kind of the history of minimalism, Old Testament minimalism. And there's this long quote from Gary Rensburg at Rutgers, so definitely not a nobody in Old Testament studies, but his response to biblical minimalism, I'll just read a few passages that seem a little bit reminiscent.
Please do.
Right.
Some of them, the biblical minimalists, are driven, as I indicated above, by Marxism and leftist politics. Some of them are former evangelical Christians who are now see the evils of their former ways. Some of them are countercultural people left over from the 60s and 70s whose personality includes the questioning and authority of all aspects of their lives. Further along, if not actual Marxism, it's leftist politics in general. If it's not revolution against the sins of one's youth, the sin being once having identified as an evangelical Christian, then the issue is an anti-authority culture in general. Further, I do not hesitate to use these terms. These scholars are driven by anti-Zionism approaching on anti-Semitism. So this is apparently the normal rhetoric that Old Testament scholars use for people who basically say, hey, our methodology is crap. We shouldn't just believe everything the Bible says. We should have primary sources to understand secondary sources. And this is apparently anti-Semitic.
Right.
If you take a very highly critical view, you question pericope, you question narrative because it is a Jewish, it has obviously Jewish roots, gospel material at least is centered with Jewish, if you will, ideal, okay? Because you could say there's a lot of Greco-Roman influence.
Sure.
But like, if you just deny it happened, in a sense, you hate Jews, or you, and if you do that with the history of Jewish people, and it's kind of weird. Like, when did we should start like coining a fictive term for haters of haters of Hellenes and others, because we now realize Zeus didn't exist. We accept Heracles as fiction and fabulous, but so did the ancient authors.
Anti-Hellenic.
I know.
Yeah.
I think also it just shows that, these were below the belt, just seriously unprofessional, treatments of your work, Richard. And I've written I've written some things in my past. And so I know the kind of work that goes into that was non-trivial, hundreds of pages. And you've got somebody there that's not even clear that they read it entirely. And they're just vomiting onto the keyboard all sorts of insulting and, fallacious and incendiary kind of, it's just inappropriate on every sentence almost.
Yeah.
And there were a few things there where it felt like, okay, maybe that could be helpful advice, but they're almost trying to feign like professionalism for just a second here or there, but then they can't help themselves and they just plunge back into stupidity. And if the publisher's listening to this, I suggest you get new reviewers, people that I don't know if they exist out there that can handle the kind of scholarship that's coming, but you need professionalism, truly academic, secular thinkers that are out there that have the ability to work through this kind of literature and this kind of theoretical work without getting unhinged inside over it. And in this kind of it's just really adolescent. But one of the things I would say to our listeners, some people kind of wonder how things got to where they're at. Well, I would just want to point out the obvious here that we're dealing with, we don't have anyone in Roman antiquity that's a historical figure that is so thoroughly and consistently and extensively mythological in his treatment. And so that, where does that put us if we're rational adults looking at this? Yeah, I would expect there to be a range of treatments that would happily include what Richard's bringing, and that this would be right smack dab in the middle of secular mainstream work in this topic if it were a healthy, appropriate discourse, if it were the West handling its own sacred traditions with intellectual honesty. And so this is exactly what should be being published, this kind of work, and that he is constantly up against these kind of, hurricane of crap as he's trying to bring forward his best scholarship into these topics. And he's doing the honest work that's not beholden to the herd and the status quo and the different forces that are out there that up to this point have governed this discussion. And so he deserves our support.
Yeah, I'm reminded of my section in this book, the new book, on Apollonius of Tyana, where I make these points that you're talking about, where in that field, like, it's totally acceptable to doubt his existence, right? Like there's positions. And in fact, one of the scholars that I cite says, like, it'd be totally respectable for you to say that it's all completely mythological, that there was no guy, like, and but we're gonna like study the sources anyway and go on and so on. And what I do there is I actually say, well, I think you can make a better than 50% probability you can get there for Apollonius, but it's not a high probability, right? So it's like, it's there's a decent probability he didn't exist. And yet that judgment comes from evidence we have for him that we don't have for Jesus. And a lot of it has to do with what you were talking about. Like, if you were to judge Apollonius solely on the life of Apollonius by Philostratus, like, say, oh my God, this is 100% mythological, I have no reason to believe this guy existed, right? If that was all you had, everybody would agree, like, yeah, this guy's probably made up. And that would be a legitimate position to take. But there's actually evidence. Yeah, but there actually is other, like, little pieces of evidence. They're not smoking gun, but they're strong enough to, like, move the ball a little towards probability, right? That he existed. And it's the kind of stuff that I wish we had for Jesus. And if we did have for Jesus, one of the peer reviewers goes on this kind of like, well, if we had all this evidence, I think that Carrier would still maintain that his doubt in the historicity of Jesus, which is a very, like, weird, like, you're literally, like, gaslighting me, and you're, like, trying to get into my head and claiming that you know better how I would respond to something. And it's all hypothetical, so this has no business in a peer review report because it has nothing to do. You haven't seen it happen. It doesn't matter. It's not happening in the book. But if we had the evidence that we have for Apollonius, my probability results for Jesus would be different. They would look more like my results for Apollonius. And that's one of the points that I make in the book, is I show, like, here's a Bayesian analysis for Apollonius, right? And, like, if we had the same kind of stuff for Jesus, it would be literally the same result, because it's the same kind of evidence, has the same mathematical effect. It doesn't matter what you plug in as long as it meets the same kind of criteria. So, but we don't have that. That's all I'm saying, is that we don't have that, right? And then this fucking flames them out. They can't handle it.
I think, again, there's an allergic, it feels, even those who are secularist, I'm putting in scare quotes here, those who aren't necessarily, if you ask them, you went to a bar and had a beer with them, you say, do you believe this stuff? And they're like, no, I mean, not really. Okay, there's some kind of, like, wells have the existing bones still that shows that there's, like, a leftover fossil there in their genetic code for where their legs used to be. Okay, there's some fossil remaining because this is a living religion, and there's a tendency, I think, on, like, treating this completely different than what we would if it was Heracles. If we had a living Heracles cult today, and I'm not talking about a few people who are called Hellenes in Greece who believe in Heracles that have zero significance. We're talking
60% of Congress is Herculeans.
We're talking about, like 30% of the planet's population.
Right, yeah.
Okay, like this is kind of a big deal, and I don't think people are factoring in how big of a deal that would be. I wish there were more people coming in who are challenging your position. And I brought this up to you. This is how a lot of people, I think, misunderstand you. And that's why
Yeah.
did a recording.
We've done some videos. People can check out Myth Vision. We've got other drops. By the way, like the Derek ran a here's your opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah,
Patreon. Got a bunch of questions, and we've done several. We'll do more. They're all great questions. They lead to really great 25-minute clips on this, and there's stuff that most people don't know about. Really, there's a lot of ignored stuff, but it's really cool stuff. Anyways, I wanted to point that out because what you're about to talk about is connected to that. There are all those other videos. There are people who want to get into this can get into it more.
Yeah, and all I'm saying is I wish that Carrier's open into here. Like I told him, I said, what if we had a different mythicism model and it wasn't just yours? Which he's got all these things that help him make the most sense out of the data that makes him push to his view. But I'm I'm gonna try and throw some spaghetti at the wall, and maybe you check it out and you peer review what I'm saying. Tell me what you think is not gonna work. But anyway, he's open to that. So I just don't think that would work in a seminary. Of course, I don't think that's gonna work in most of the people at Yale even are there for becoming pastors and taking their religious faith to a different level, and they're literally there not because they're hey, this is kind of my science in a way. I enjoy learning history and understanding this material from a completely secular view. The highest, Oxford, Yale, Harvard, there's some really good, but there's also a lot in there, as you pointed out, Dr. Miller, that they're training people to be pastors, to lead people in their faith and to help them guide them in their lives. It's a much more secular level, more advanced scholarly field compared to your conservative, Christian college with your seminary, but it's still tainted with a lot of this stuff. It feels so. Yeah. Anyway, I took it off. I don't know where you were going with that.
No, that was it. Yeah,
I kind of wanted to get in Camille Gregor's stuff.
Because that's one of the biggest things in this.
And I know that Aaron has some information here, and I want to leave.
Yeah, I want to hear Aaron's take on this. Yeah. Unless Aaron wants me to brief my take on it first. But.
I think it makes more sense if you go first, Derek, and then I can bore everyone with Excel sheets.
Yeah, I'll just say this. When they did publish this, they did a really good article. That
they've done two, by the way. So be aware there's two. But yeah, go ahead.
The one specifically on names was really cool to find out fictive.
Oh,
names.
You're talking about that.
I'm just bringing.
They did two articles on that too. Yeah.
Really cool.
They were really great work. I cited in the book.
Yeah, they critique the mythologists and those kind of who are strongly advocating for the historicity of fictive people.
Did you just invent the word mythopologist?
We've had that. We call them mythologists because the McCrews and all the different people.
Okay.
It's kind of an inside joke. But then they did this specifically responding to you, right? And listen, if you have, I don't care who you are, if you have a criticism of mythicism, the thing about Myth Vision is let's bring it. I want to hear the best arguments because I think we all want to hear and want to get to the bottom of it. And Carrier was go for it. Game.
Yeah.
So we did this 5-hour live stream. Unfortunately, Camille's audio.
It was 5 hours.
I think it was 4 or 5 hours.
I knew it was a lot, but yeah, okay.
Camille's audio was in and out a lot. Yeah. But my takeaway, if I can give you my dumbed down average Joe version, my takeaway was you weren't putting enough people in the list, right? So once you put in more people, you've got more history people in there. And there's more history people than there are myth people in this Rank Raglan hero list that he does, which I will get your answer to.
Yeah.
But then there was this factor when I was reading the new book where I was like, did you address this? And this is something we need to address while we're here, but paint the narrative how you guys want in terms of getting this information for the audience to understand. The biggest thing I saw that walked away for me was how when they showed mythic, non-existent people, all of them were Bronze Age, distant past, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I'm like, dude, factor in the fact that more historical people who have legends, we'll call them legends for the sake of the fact that they're mythic material added to real people, that made the Rank Raglan number skew different, right?
Yeah.
And then they said all the people who didn't exist, you might as well look back here to the Bronze Age, right? Except Romulus, who's 6th century.
Yeah.
Come to find out, there is one myth. Joseph A.P. Wilson brought to my attention. He found there was one mention where they did place Romulus back here near Troy, but at the end of the day, it's mostly a 6th century guy.
No, and there's a reason. So, this is that was a bit fundamentally erroneous, where they're saying dramatic date. like, yeah, the dramatic date is not a literal number of centuries, right? So like the dramatic date is founding. So they're all founding myths.
Right.
So the date is dictated by the founding of the thing that you're explaining, right? So it's irrelevant how many centuries or decades or whatever ago it was. So that's why Romulus is set in the, you know, the 7th century, 8th century, whatever, because that's the founding of Rome. That was the legend, I should say, the legendary founding of Rome was then. So you place him then. Most Greek heroes, it's all Troy. It's like the Trojan War is like the center of everything because of Homer. Everybody's got to be dated to the Trojan War. So like everything, all the heroes got gravitated because that's the foundation of Hellen. Trojan War is kind of like the beginning of united Hellenism. Like the whole concept of Hellenism is united. The Greeks uniting as like Hellenic identity starts mythically with the Trojan War, right? So the foundation of Hellenism is the Trojan War. So all their heroes have to be piled onto the Trojan War. What is the Jewish myth? Okay, so it's Moses, right? So everything's got to be piled on there. And you go to Osiris. Well, it's got to be like this particular, like when the pharaohs began. So you got to like, so the how all this is being decided based on the foundation of the thing you're explaining. These are all etiological myths, which if you look that up, it's AET, etiological myths, are myths about the founding or the origin of a ritual or a belief or something like that, or institutions usually. And so like if you're saying, if you're going to make an etiological myth about the foundation of a religion that began in the 30s AD, where do you put the hero? 30s AD, right? So it's dictated. It has nothing to do. You can't say that because all the Greeks based Hellenism on the Trojan War and therefore stuffed all their heroes in the Trojan War, that therefore the Jews or the Christians should have stuffed Jesus at the Trojan War. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? It's a completely illogical argument.
I brought these details up in our messenger together too. And me and Aaron were going back and forth about this. It was something I thought of too. And I was like, okay, hold on. There is a weird kind of idea that Paul seems to place Jesus back here with Moses. Because when he says, look, when we went through the wilderness experience and you needed water, you know, that rock that was in the wilderness, that was Christ. So notice he's still pushing.
Yeah, it's because Jesus was the first created being, right? So he's exists in all these times. But the foundation of the religion is the incarnation, right? So that's why you have to put it there. So that argument is invalid fundamentally, and I actually addressed this already on the historicity of Jesus. The original study has a whole section on rapid legendary development and why you can't make this argument, and they just ignored that and just
it sounds captivating to me.
It's an invalid approach.
Because I was like, why didn't he go back here like the other? He must be different. He must be, historical stuff.
The other article, the other Gregor team article is better, right? So like the version I read, I haven't seen the published version. I don't even know if it's out yet, but the one I read was very disorganized and hard to follow. It's not a particularly well-written article. It's a lot of rambling and confusion. But if you steel man it and go your way through it, the model of what they're doing is actually legit in the sense that this is the first article. And I was like so gratified, even though they're wrong. I was so gratified to read it because it was the first time ever that anyone actually correctly engaged with the argument of chapter 6 of On the Historicity of Jesus, right? Like with the saying, like there's only one way to rebut my prior probability argument. There's only one. You have to do this. And there's no other way. Is you have to actually engage with the frequency argument. You have to actually put more people in the set. There's no other way to do it, right? You can't apologetically get your way out of the argument. You can't get Jesus out of the set. You can't claim the set doesn't exist. Like all of this apologetic bullshit, it's dumb. And then the usual one, like the critics and the formal critics will say, but it's possible that a historical person would have that. And I was like, I fucking said that. Like that's not, the question is how many people who do this are historical. It's not a question of whether there are any, it's a question of how many. So you have to get to the how many argument. You have to do a frequency argument. There's no other way to rebut my prior probability argument. And so the Gregor team approach was correct. Like this is exactly what you need to do is like, you know what, there are more people that should be in the set, right? And then we look at it because I even predicted on the historicity of Jesus, I said if this was a non-predictive set, then there should be a way more historical people in it, right? And I explicitly make that explain it and everything. And so so like what they're doing is methodologically correct, right? Like it's just like finally somebody's like taking the argument seriously.
Trying to find people to put in.
They're taking the argument seriously and they're actually doing something correct. The error they commit is that they make this one basic error, which is they overgeneralize the criteria. And so they end up like, so that they can pile anybody in for any stupid reason, right? Like, so everybody qualifies. Basically, everybody qualifies for every criterion. Everybody goes in. So what they're doing is they're ignoring the fact that we're talking about genre theory. So we're talking about a genre of heavily mythologized people. We're talking about a particular genre of a story of the tragic hero king. They ignore that, and they say they'll do things like, well, Aristotle was sent away to so like Aristotle had tutors. He was sent away to go to like boarding school or whatever. That counts as losing your parents and having a foster parent.
That's
right. It's
so
like, come on, man.
outside.
Yeah. Right. Like, come on, that's ridiculous. Whereas they'll do, like, if you look at like Joseph, like Joseph, for example, they make a good point that Joseph is not a baby. So one of the criteria is that he an attempt on his life is made as an infant. And I even rejected Mithridates by saying the attempt on his life is as a child, not an infant, right? So it's like my position was, yes, that's the case, because that's how I was reading the scholarship. But they point out, like, no, he's 17 at the time. And I'm like, and so, okay, except I realized, like, actually, no, because that's the reason Rank and Raglan included them is because what they meant to write, and the thing is, like, not that it's as an infant, it's usually as an infant. Right, it's like, so an attempt is made on their life before they're an adult, right? Before they're like full into their manhood or whatever, but usually as an infant. That's how it should have been worded, right? And you can show this by showing the entire story of how the attempt on Joseph's life hits like criteria after criteria after criteria after criteria after criteria, are exactly like the story of Romulus, for example, and Moses and so on. So you can actually show that this is a genre that he falls into, so that his age is actually irrelevant. Mm-hmm. What matters is it before he comes into his kingdom? Is it before he's a leader or whatever? And so I was like, okay, yeah, when you think of it that way, then when you do it through genre theory and not through like, we're just going to arbitrarily find any like incongruity, or we're just arbitrarily inventing criteria to do this. When you do it through genre theory, you get it another way. And in the book, for those who are interested, I do it with a cross comparison with John Wick. So those of you who are into like modern cinema, I actually have a modern cinema genre theory argument in the book, where I show that this same point with like, are you going to argue that the dog being fridged doesn't count as the death of a loved one that motivates all the mass killing, right? No, obviously it was written deliberately for the dog to be a loved one who motivates the killer to go back and kill everybody, right? So that's it, the fact, but it's a dog, it's not a person, is a completely inappropriate response to that genre. Like, obviously it's the genre, right? Like it's the beloved who gets killed who motivates the ex-killer to go back to killing. It's so, like, the trope is so replicated in so many forms. Anyway, so that's an example. I use this example in the book, so people are interested in that. So anyway, that was my take in the book, is that they're over broadening the criteria. So they're not roping in, even in the book I said, like, extremely mythologized people, not merely mythologized people. We're not measuring merely mythologized people. We're measuring heavily. That's why I had, like, you have to score more than 12 or more than 11. That's also why the criteria have to be fabulous and so on. So, but when you approach their study, like, they do a lot of data, there's a lot of stuff in there. They make a lot of good points. Like, some of the things in their first article where they argue for a rescoring of some of the Rank Raglan heroes, I think might be correct. I don't care, because this rescoring keeps them in my set, so it doesn't matter. Like, if Hercules is a 14 or a 13, like, it doesn't matter. And the Joseph one is a good, like, that one, like, it dropped him off the list if we follow them, but we actually I didn't count the fact that he has a tomb. Like, anyway, that you go in there, I talk about this, right? So it's all in the book. But what they did do, and I mentioned this earlier, is that they present evidence that convinces me that I think I was wrong about Mithridates, Apollonius, and Alexander. And I think those ones meet the criteria that they argue, right? Like, the other ones don't meet the criteria. They're over broadening. They're both pulling in people that don't belong in the set. But those guys do. And so, like, I was like, okay, yeah, no, they're legit. I really should put those in the set, and I should redo the math based on that. And I do it. And that's exactly how this process should happen, right? Like, it should be like that, right? Like you say, like, okay, I think you've got the wrong number of people in a Raglan set. Here, let me make an argument for it being a different number. And I would look at it and go, okay, I think you're right about some of that, not others. And then it would change the result, and then it would roll the ball down further the field, right? So it would be progress on this idea. And what they did is they did significantly narrow my margin of error. That's a huge advance, right? So that's important. I know people think it's trivial because it's inside my original margins of error, but I think it's an important advance. I think it's important contribution from my perspective. That's valuable. Mm-hmm. So that's, and then the book talks about this and explains why, and it changes the probabilities and so on. So I think that was good, even when they were mistaken. At least they were like engaging the argument correctly. And so that's literally the only critic that has done that. I have not read any formal, like, academic published thing that did not simply interact with my work disingenuously. Like everything else is bullshit, right? Like just all kinds of things is maddening. But that was at least, like, even though they're wrong, they were at least doing the right thing, and they actually did change something. They actually did achieve something that made a difference. So that was my take. Anyway, so that Aaron has dropped a bomb on me earlier, said, like, I've got more to talk about. I'm like, what, really? And so,
this also somewhat relates to the review, because I remember the reviewer was aghast that you said that Bible scholars don't know math, and they apparently couldn't take that criticism. So I have other background reasons to believe that strongly.
As soon as he says that, he makes multiple mathematical errors in the subsequent paragraph.
Yeah. But I decided, okay, I was, looking at the paper from Chrissy and Camille with their various counts of historical people on the Rank-Raglan thing, and I thought some of these things being included felt specious. But am I going to go through the hundreds of cases and argue every single one individually? That seems terrible. Is there some in aggregate way of being objective about this? Because if we nitpick every single thing, my beard is long enough as it is. I don't need it to be on the floor by the time we get this discussion done.
Methuselah of the project. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I decided, okay, my background not only is in physics, but my day job is as a data scientist. So taking data and trying to squeeze things out of it, look for things, is what I get paid for. And I get paid okay for it. So I decided, let me just take the results that they had for all the historical folks, take the results from the original study from Raglan himself for who met those things, keep Jesus separate initially, and see where do the chips fall, and see if there's anything that seems a bit weird. So I'm going to steal the screen if that's allowed.
Yep.
All right. So I hope everyone loves Excel, because I'm going to use it just enough to keep you bored. All right. So are you seeing my screen right now?
There you go. Okay.
Super. Okay. So like I just said, I literally went through all of the historic folks that they had that scored at least 12 as the minimal score. And I highlighted those that had 12 at the minimum and higher color if it was only like at the maximum, things like that. And put an X here for every single case where they said, for example, Alexander met criteria 1, the Rank-Raglan thing. Question marks where they were kind of iffy about it. And I'm just going through and counting.
No, he can't, because you need to see the whole sheet to understand it.
I can. So yeah, there's a lot of X's here. I apologize. Yeah, so I spent a little too much time just organizing this and checking that I put all the data in correctly. Wow. But my question is this: okay, first off, is there some sign that there is some level of, let's call it, grade inflation of getting these people into that paradigm? So one thing I did is I took all the various counts of how many of the criteria were met for the historic people over here versus the mythical folks down here. And to do that, I made something called a box plot. It's a way of just showing like the statistical values here. And so color-wise, the orange here are the mythical folks, blue is the historical. And the way a box plot is that this line here in the center is the median value. The box itself is the 75% range, where do 75% of the values are. And then these outer whiskers basically go out to like the 95% range of getting 95% of the data points. So first thing you'll notice is that for mythical people, their median value is way higher in the score than for the historic people. So there's already something that kind of indicates these distributions are not the same. But also, hey, there's no whisker down here for the historical people. They basically have all just barely gotten over the hump, which kind of looks like you're trying to just get people high enough to pass. Like I said, that's kind of a weird thing. While on the other hand, here for the box plot for mythical, it looks much closer to the sort of normal distribution you expect. So that's something that makes me a little bit suspicious. But what really allowed me to investigate this more deeply is, okay, they say such and such folk, meets criteria 1, criteria 2, etc. They have about 32 folks that at a minimum score 12. What fraction of them score on each of these things, and how does that compare to historical folks? So down here, I calculated what percentage do historical people who have at least a 12 on the score meet this criteria, what fraction of mythical people do that, and how different are those two?
Wow.
My thought is this. If you have the exact same underlying cause for these stories, then you're going to have just as many times as historical people have it more often, and mythical people have this criteria more often. You would expect, you would basically expect what would look like a bell curve centered at 0. That's what you would expect.
Yeah.
And if you don't see that, that's when you start wondering what's going on. Now, at this point, this is where I start giving the middle finger to Excel, because I hate dealing with it. So I switch over to the Python programming language, which is my bread and butter. So I just took all of those various values of the differences in percentages between mythical and historical folks. Positive is it's more represented in mythical people. Negative, it's more represented in historical people.
It exited your chart.
It did. Well, that's a bunch of hooey. Let's change that.
So we're following you. Do it again.
All right. Well, one of these days, this thing's going to do what I tell it to do.
So you said you ran a Python statistics thing.
Yes. Yeah. So I just basically took the list of, like I say, where I have a positive value here, that meant that this criteria was more represented in the mythical people. Negative is where it was more represented in historical people. If this were just, all the differences between the two are random, but it's the same underlying cause, you would expect a probability distribution that would follow the bell curve. It would have a nice bell shape, and its center would be at 0. If we actually plot this out with this histogram, you'll notice that the peak of this is well above 0, and there's also this second peak here. So in statistics, we would call this a multimodal distribution.
Yeah.
And that's not what you see if there's one underlying cause of your data. And the second mode here is at the negative range. That's where the historical people are.
It kicked
Oh
again.
my goodness.
Yeah.
If I may say, grr.
You're absolutely right.
Grr. Yeah. So this is just to enhance the drama. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
All right. So like I say, this is not the distribution you'd expect if it were just like the same underlying cause. I also ran the histogram a couple different ways. There's different ways of doing the binning, but overall you see that it peaks off of 0. So it's not, nicely at 0. And the fact there's a second mode here in the negative range makes it look like, hey, they're trying to bring in more in some criteria just to get people over the edge. This is not the normal distribution you expect. Now, this is when I did all the data. It gets even sharper if I only limit this to all the folks, both mythical and historical, that score at least 12. And this is the distribution, and you could see even more starkly. It's multimodal.
Oh my God, yeah.
So this, to me, is a way of a statistician of saying, hey, there's something underlying a bit weird here. This is off from what you'd expect from a normal distribution, centered at 0. And we can do statistics. We all love statistics, right?
Yeah.
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 All right. So I performed something that's called a t-test. This is basically a way of saying how strong two different distributions are. And I perform that for our test here. There are the 22 criteria. I run this. I get a t-test value of 2.2. What does that mean? It's usually easier to interpret this as a p-value, which is how likely are you to get this if these results are so good just by random chance. Normally, statisticians will use a p-value of 0.5 or less to say it's statistically significant.
Yeah.
My p-value was 0.03, more or less.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So it suggests, hey, there is something statistically significant that's knocking this away from a normal distribution centered at 0. Now, there was one other thing I decided to do. okay, if there are two humps in here, one for like more historical people, one for more mythical people, which one is Jesus closer to?
Yeah.
So I created this vector of ones and minus ones. What this is I took the more conservative scoring of Jesus, of which of the criteria does Jesus match. A 1 is where Jesus does match that criteria. A -1 is where he doesn't. So if Jesus is more historical than mythical, he should score more often with the features that are more common with the historical people, and vice versa.
Right.
So that's what the minus sign does here, by switching the signs there. Now, if I take these two lists here, multiply them together, and just add them up, I'm basically adding together all the scores. This is not the most rigorous way of doing this, but it's a quick way of intuitively seeing, one, how strong the evidence is one direction or the other, and the plus and minus sign saying in which direction does that evidence point. And if we do that, we multiply those vectors together, add them up. Do we get a positive value or a negative value? I get a value of +1. What does that mean? First off, it's positive. And if I look at the standard deviation, it's about a quarter. So in other words, this sum is pretty far away from 0 relative to how much noise there is in the data. So in other words, if we're going to say Jesus is anything, based on their own data, Jesus is closer to the mythical group than the historical group, even with their data just counted as is, not disagreeing with any of their counts.
That's right. Yeah.
And this is just a couple of histograms of what those scores look like. And you can see there's a couple that are strongly negative, but there's a whole bunch that are strongly positive, pointing towards mythical. So if you thought you came to Myth Vision today and you weren't going to get some math, you were wrong.
Right?
That's good. That reminds me that. So I approach all of this colloquially because I can't run Python statistics, first of all, but also I don't want to do that. Like I don't want to like force the reader to see all that stuff, because then they're going to get lost and they're going to get hazy eyed and they're going to move on to the next chapter.
I've experienced that when I've done the same thing.
Yeah, but it's hard to avoid doing that when you need to make the point, right? So I try to make the point colloquially, and I'm not even sure that that's a better way to do it. What you did is what I suspected was correct, but being able to do it mathematically to like confirm my suspicions is so valuable. So I'm glad you did that. That's a lot of work you put in on that.
But the computer did the hard work. I didn't have to do any adding.
Yeah. That was kind of my point, though, is this idea that the reasons that they pull in, like, I don't know, 30, 100 people, whatever. But most of the reasons they're pulling them in are very mundane, right? Like, come on, like really, like Aristotle going to boarding school equals losing your parents and having foster parents, right? Where it's like it doesn't really track, but it's a lot of mundane stuff. Whereas the mythical people like Jesus, it's all really fabulous stuff, and so that's kind of like I had that intuition and I made that point, and I do it as best I can in that chapter. But I think what you just did is showed mathematically that my intuitions are correct there. That actually Jesus is super typed mythical, and so he's with the mythical people. So the rate of someone being historical in that set is going to be lower. Just necessarily, it's always going to be lower because there's always going to be more made up people in that set. It's not going to be there's going to be 0 historical people in that set. That's not the claim. But it's going to be more, and that should be kind of obvious to people. Like if you think like the more mythologized someone is, the more frequently they're going to turn out not to have existed, right? Like that's seems obvious to me. But to actually see like a statistical rundown of that,
I was going to say if he did, I'll say, if there was a dude, like it reminds me of Lucian. I constantly bring this up: how to write history. He bitched about this big time, and he said if anyone is mixing in legend, myth in with a historical dude, like practically in a nutshell, what he said is they're committing an unforgivable sin, because the generations that are going to come after will never be able to know what actually is the case.
Yeah.
And he did not like that. And one of his heroes was Thucydides. If you're going to write history, he thought someone like that is doing rigorous history. And he pretty much complained about stuff that is exactly what the Gospels, look like. And I'm thinking to myself, if there was a guy, what a damn joke, for like anyone in the future is like, clearly God wasn't seeing a time where humans were like, we really want to know what happened. Because
I think in some ways we're just like putting math. I loved what you just did there, and it's so good to just put some scientific rigor on everything, some numbers. I think it's kind of like what you've got with like cognition. Human cognition is just a natural instinct for us to see, okay, I see a stop sign, I see a tree, I see an apple on the tree, I get hungry. You know, these are the signals around us that are communicating with us cognitively, and we exist in that. We're wired for that. And the same thing goes with literature. When you read literature, it gives off, the writer, whether intentionally or not, is giving off signals on how it's to be processed. And they're intentionally forming their story in such a way that almost like a meal or something, like a chef making a meal, and that intentionality is built right into the fiber and tissue of what they're writing. And it follows stock patterns. They're drawing on innumerable centers of cultures, of literatures, of patterns, of frames for writing and this kind of thing, and drawing on these kinds of tropic frameworks for how to tell a story about a legendary, a mythical, somebody that's aggrandized above the mundane in literature, in their write-up, in their textualization. And so the signals within the text itself, and that's the value of like Dundas and Raglan Rank and all these guys, is, you know, I don't know if Hansen and these guys actually took, you know, you should probably sit in a folkloristics class if you're going to go and publish something against somebody's take on folklorism, you know, and see what their what their tool chain is. What are they doing? What are they up to? What are they trying to accomplish with that? And I know Dundas, he was a high-ranked academician at Berkeley. He was no joke, you know, and he followed that up with including Jesus in the list. And we do well to try and wire our scholarship into secular disciplined work like that. And so I think that kind of like the probability statistics, the Bayesianism that's going underneath. If you look at machine learning, ChatGPT, all these things are running Bayesian math constantly.
True, yeah.
And predictive analytics, and trying to say, is that, you know, and our self-driving cars are coming and all of this stuff. And we're going to do this also with ancient literature. And so be on the lookout. All you academics that are out there publishing into New Testament, get ready, because we're going to run this stuff through ChatGPT 10 or whatever at some point. And it's going to give us the answers, and the answers aren't going to be a whole lot off of what Aaron and the rest of us are doing, what Richard Carrier is doing, what I've done with my own tropological analysis of the translation fable. You're going to look, and I have already actually ran that research myself. I'm big into AI and all of that, and so it's kind of.
Have you been following Aeneas, this new project where they're using AI to translate the Vesuvian papyri, the stuff that's been recovered from Herculaneum? They're like, because a lot of the manuscripts are like horribly jacked up, but they're using AI now. They've got a program where they're actually doing this to try and like reconstruct the text where the manuscript is damaged and so on, where there's a lot of holes. And what they do is that what they find is that the AI is not 100% reliable, but the thing is it saves a lot of time. So like it throws you a bunch of balls, and then the experts can then sort between the balls and say, actually, this one's spot on, this one's not, etc. So when you combine AI with an expert who's vetting the results of the AI, they're making a lot of progress that they wouldn't have made otherwise. So this is how AI can be used productively in a field, rather than just trusting everything it says. You're using the one thing that it does really well, which is pattern match, and do statistical. Well, literally, like you said, it's all Bayesian, right? It's actually Bayesian mathematics to do that, and that is actually happening. It's like I said, Aeneas is a project. That's the name of the hero. I don't know if it's an acronym or whatever, but it's what they called it. There's an equivalent one for Latin. I can't remember what the name of it is. You can find it if you Google it. So they're doing this. This is happening, and it's already happening. This reminds me, like, to go back to the peer review reports, where the one reviewer who complained, who was very angry at me telling him he doesn't understand math. I didn't actually personally tell him he didn't understand math. This is the thing, is like in the chapter, I say like some people don't, some people do. I even give evidence, like an example that I ran into of what, like how important this is. There are literally Ivy League professors who don't get the math. I give it an actual concrete example of this. But I don't say like all y'all are terrible at math. I said like, no, there's enough of you that are bad at it that you really do need to like take this more seriously and learn it. And then I go through teaching it. And then, the reviewer says, how dare you suggest I don't know math? And then they make a bunch of math mistakes. But the thing they were going on about though was that they didn't understand what the point was, like the mathematical point, like why you need. And the example they gave, they said there are clearly historians who know math, and he lists like people who are doing like digital humanities, right? And it's like, okay, that's cool. Like, are you in digital humanities? Are you running LLM models on Papyri? Like, and even if they did, let's say they were someone who's actually doing the Aeneas project, like they would not be so foolish as to have said that, because they would say like, oh yeah, you know what? Like I am doing that, but you're right. Most of my colleagues have no fucking idea what I'm doing.
They only feel they're not doing it. So
right. Yeah,
the only
exactly.
reason I complain is because I'm not.
Yeah.
Look,
You can't cite that. Yes, absolutely. There are some people doing fucking like statistics and stuff like advanced math in humanities. Absolutely true. Are they the norm? No, they're like loathed and not read by hardly anyone else in the field. Like it's like the taking the idea that most historians are bad at math and are scared of math and don't want to learn math and don't use it doesn't mean all of them.
Just
right?
wait.
But it became an identity threat. So they're thinking like, you're saying most, you're including me.
Right.
How
exactly.
dare you?
Yeah.
And
It's like a Freudian slip, so to speak.
right. So,
like,
but if he was one of these exceptions, he would know. He was one
know
of
what
the
you're saying is
exceptions.
right.
Yeah, he would know. Like, yeah, you know what? You're right. Like, I actually do understand all this stuff, but you're right. Like, most of us don't. I get it.
Actually, I know.
But someone who's like
Jeff Tripp's like that. He's a mathematician. He's a Bible scholar,
Mhm.
brilliant mind, and
Mhm.
he has told me they
I
don't
cite examples. Yeah, no, literally, I cite examples of historians who are doing this correctly. People in humanities are like, so yeah, obviously I acknowledge there are some historians who are doing this right. But I'm saying like most historians aren't, and certainly my critics aren't, because with the exception of Gregor, the Gregor teams, like they're actually doing it decently. But anyway, so for the reviewer to get like all in a huff about this tells me that it's very emotional to them. It's not a rational response to what I'm saying. Because I didn't say all historians are terrible at this, and I'm this great genius. They accuse me of claiming this. I was like, no, I'm just saying there are a lot of historians who don't get this stuff. And I've realized this, especially in the last 10 years, right? So I realize I need to spend some time on this. That's chapter 5, right? It's like this is a concrete, factual reality. And I'm not saying that like it's all historians are bad at this. So they took it as an identity threat. Like I was attacking them as a person. And I wasn't. But they didn't have the goods. If you're going to get angry about that, you would have the chops. But of course, if you had the chops, you wouldn't get angry about it because you would know I was right.
You would just be in a total agreement. Look, one of the things I've heard in a long time, guys, and Gregor pointed this out a while back. The first video I did that kind of made me question, like, yeah, if there's even one, and I heard this in the peer reviewer, even if there's one piece of data in all of the New Testament literature that actually could be anchored to a guy, then mythicism's false. Okay? So there's this mindset, like if there's even a single thing, if he had a brother, if he was born of a, any one of these things is true, it makes historicity true, and mythicism's false even on one thing. And it's the opposite, right? You can have all myth except that one thing, and it falsifies the mythicism argument. And I'm thinking to myself, like that could be true, but like, if you have to go through and you have to dismiss 99.9% to find the one thing or something, I'm just giving you off the top of my head. Like, when do you kind of question the one thing? Or if there was, as Bob Price would always say, like we've lost the guy and he's so irrelevant that there's nothing. You might as well just say he didn't exist because what the hell? He's not it.
You hit on a good point, and that's just the same. I think it's the same reviewer who's offended that he doesn't understand math. But the same concept, and I talk about this is the thing is I talk about this in the book. You can't just say I didn't, which is that it is logically possible. It is logically possible for one single piece of evidence to wipe out everything else.
Yep.
Absolutely, and I give examples. I literally fucking give examples, but they don't care. They didn't read it. They didn't care. But the thing is that we don't have those. Right. So like it doesn't say like, yeah, logically possible that you could have a smoking gun that could cancel everything. I agree. I even say this. I even give you the math for how to do it. Like it's all in there, but we don't have it.
Right.
So it doesn't matter like to complain. There could be one thing. But
You
but
get
I
what they're
think
saying.
yeah. But
Yeah.
you're also getting like to the point where they were arguing that there's a point where one of the reviewers tries to argue that you can't say that there's only been two academic peer-reviewed books on the historicity of Jesus, because there's thousands of books about the historical Jesus.
Yes.
Now, I actually explain the difference between, like, this is covered in chapter 1, I think. If not 1, it's certainly in 2 or 3, where I literally talk about this, and they just blow past this, right? And I make this point, is like, all of those books you're counting presume historicity and then get to their arguments.
Right.
So it, like you're saying, like, but what if you can prove the crucifixion really happened? It's like, but that's not what people are doing.
Yeah.
They're assuming Jesus existed. And then when you start from that assumption, then you can argue for the historicity of the crucifixion, because you're already assuming there's a guy. So you have to explain where he went, right? Like, how did he end? Once you're assuming historicity, yeah, then you can get to the crucifixion and so on. But they're incorrect mathematically in terms of how this works. So books about the historical Jesus are not books about the historicity of Jesus. And for the reviewer to not understand that, even though I explicitly explain the difference between those two things and why it matters and why it's actually harming the field, because they're stuck in this obsolete paradigm, because they're thinking that exactly that thing. It's like, but there's all these books about a historical Jesus, how could he not
It's
exist?
so overwhelming.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not getting it. It's like, no, you're assuming it. Like, methodologically, you're assuming historicity and then building on that. If you step back and say, what if we don't assume historicity? Well, then all kinds of shit goes wrong, right? Like then, and I feel like neither reviewer was willing to go there. They were not willing to even entertain the possibility that Jesus didn't exist. And if he didn't exist, how would you then reevaluate all those books about the historical Jesus? You'd say, oh shit, those books don't really hold up because they were based on this assumption, and they're not really doing the work of proving the historicity of Jesus. They might look like they are, but they aren't methodologically doing that. And that was the point of the book, and the reviewers completely ignored it. And
throw this out there, Rick. You know how your translation fable combined with my reading of your stuff made me want to, like, just spaghetti at the wall, posit a different mythicist model, kind of a peer-reviewed version, if possible. I'm not an expert in the language, but you know how you talk about fabricating, right? Like, they are literally whole cloth working off prior tropes. We know they're doing all sorts of scriptural rewrites, retelling stories using scripture. What if, rather than the angelic celestial model and working into gospels being later kind of euhemerist historical myths of Jesus, I'm wondering if we can come up with a model that paints Jesus like Heracles, like he's whole cloth, he's on earth here. You would have to try and explain the data differently, of course, but it's just another position without just assuming there was a guy. What if we did one where he was whole cloth invented, using this idea that they needed to, whether it be, hey, we had a Roman-Jewish war, it would then you'd have to deal with the chronology of Paul's letters. You'd have to have explanations that make sense of the data. But again, you kind of ask yourself, like, when did they invent these myths? And what if Jesus is just an origin myth using a different model of mythicism? And then, dude, what then? Now you have a third example of mythicism that comes up with no peer-reviewed, like, I'm going to prove historicity from the ground up in a secular fashion, so to speak, rather than just assuming it's the case. I say throw all the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. Why not?
Yeah, I think there's room for, and I think Richard Carrier would probably agree with this. There's room for other kind of paradigms, other ideas around beside him, other models and theorizing. He put it to the test. Have a discussion, an adult discussion about, is it this, is it that, is it this, is it that? There's all sorts of room. He's bringing forward a very powerful case, but I think that there's room for others in the room to talk about other ways of thinking about that. But the idea that he gets just dismissed out of hand, I think this criterion that you had, this idea that if he's wrong in one thing, the whole thing goes out the window. Come on. Like,
no.
Where else do we do this? Like, nobody else is held to that. Nobody else's work is held to that, this kind of idea. And the other thing is this is the idea of a theory, right? A hypothesis, the idea, does this comprehensively explain the data? To what extent does this particular hypothesis explain the data that we have in front of us? Does it give us a clean, cohesive, basic explanation? And the answer is yeah, except for maybe on the fringes. And so there, in a lot of some of the things that Richard and I talked about is some of the discussion there, whether you had brothers or whatever, these feel like fringe discussions on the edges of what's already been established, as we're dealing with a mythological guy here. And so we're talking about on the edges of that, you know, did he have a brother? You know, these kind of little, let's go to this one little verse here and this one little area over here where maybe that's all that's left though, right? And so I think we just got to be honest that the lion's share of evidence is pointing a decidedly one direction here. And yeah, he and I, you know, may have some differences in terms of, you know, I think they're probably, it's kind of like the debate on, you know, was there a historical, I don't know, King Arthur? There's plenty of room for a discussion there, but what there isn't room for is the guy coming in trying to make a case for Merlin and trying to, you know, reestablish, you know, English history and create this whole kind of paradigm around this historical figure that we have certitude about and all that. There isn't room for that. So that should be laughed out of the room. And that's exactly what's not happening here. And so there's plenty of space for, I think, some more discussion. I think this should actually be exactly where the discussion is at. This idea that you go to SBL and there's, you know, 6,000 people confused over this one topic and not,
You're dealing
know.
with it. I mean, honestly,
No,
I think
it's true,
me
yeah.
and Rick talked about this on the phone. We feel really bad because I know there's people axe grinding against you. I know I've spoke to them. Look, I've talked to everybody under the sun, and I'm not naming names, but I know.
And there's machinations behind the curtain where they're actually trying to convince peer reviewers to nix my work. And stuff like that.
And there's rumors.
It's happening. Yeah,
there's people spreading rumors to try and poison the well of your character, of who you
Mhm.
are.
Yep.
You know, just you name it, of all sorts of shit for years. And these are people who are in these circles on social media, connected to other academics. And I got in a lot of fluff for my video that happened a couple months back. I'm just emotional wreck, 4 days no sleep, getting attacked from everyone under the sun for simply wanting to interview someone, okay, that I think is an expert that needs and deserves to be at the table. And long story short, I made a comment about this, that I knew that there's people who are out to get you that are definitely axe grinding against scholarship like Dr. Carrier. And someone on Twitter questioned my claim and they're like, no, that's hearsay. And I'm like, the people told me, okay? Like, I don't want to get myself buried here because I have friends. I'm not naming names. So if I'm a scholar friend of yours, if you're a friend of mine, I'm not talking, but I'm just simply saying, I know without a doubt that there is like a hatred of you and a definite despising of your work, and they do not want your shit in there. And that's not to craft a conspiracy to make this is a fact. I know without a doubt.
Yeah.
And it's just unfortunate. I feel bad that, you know, why is that not at the table?
Honestly, I think I'm that specific theory aside, I think that the peer reviewers, the reports everyone here has read illustrates this point that this is gatekeeping. It is not legitimate. Like scholarly peer review, right? So that was my impression, because this is just bullshit. Wow, I mean, it seems like the field is just gone now. Like you can't. There's no respectable standard left, and I think it was caused by my publication. I think it really like I said, set all hands on deck. Like everybody, okay, we have to stop this now. This shouldn't have happened, right? We shouldn't have allowed this in the first place. And so they're like pulling all the levers of power, including threatening my original publisher. About that. So like that's definitely absolutely happening. And I make this point in what's going to drop tomorrow, my article against Schmidt, where the opposite happens, where you have like really crappy apologetics is being passed through peer review, even though it absolutely should not have, because it says all the things that the peer reviewers want. They want that. So it's like, yeah, that's cool. We don't care that it's completely illegitimate. But the thing is like when they do that they're creating this essentially, they're essentially creating the thing that they keep denying exists, right? They're creating this phenomenon of illegitimate peer review standards where you have an extraordinary false negative when it's against what they want to happen, is their desire, their emotions, etc. And you have a high false positive result when it's something that says what they want to hear. And this results in like peer reviews value is declining in biblical studies because it's more becoming about policing ideas rather than actually improving their quality. This is a thing that's happening in all fields. I'm going to write a blog eventually about, because a lot of other people are talking about this, the what's called the crisis in peer review. This is in all fields, even physics, everybody, they're complaining about this. This is a problem it's rising. The problem there is mostly other motives, money and other things. It's not Christianity. But in this field, the driver of the false negative rate and the false positive rate, the driver of the corruption of peer review is Christianity. Even if it's not Christian specifically, it's them working through, like, trying to persuade secular scholars to do certain things, not say certain things, say certain things, and so on. So that you're basically creating this panopticon where a secular scholar can't say a certain thing. They just feel that this will cause problems for me. It'll cost a lot of emotional labor, right? I ran into this. This was with I ran into the actual scholars with this, where in private they say, like, you know what, that would cause so much grief for me, I'm just not gonna go there, right? And it's not that they necessarily fear that they're going to be fired. Some do, actually. I've had them tell me that. And it's not necessarily that they fear whatever else. But even though they do, like, they can fear it even though the threat isn't there. So it doesn't matter that maybe you're completely immune to being fired. But if you think you aren't, if you fear it, that's enough. But it doesn't even matter, because it's the emotional labor of having to deal with all the drama of the people secretly and behind you, pressuring you, arguing with you. Mm-hmm. Basically, it amounts to a harassment, right? So you're basically going to be harassed by your own colleagues and friends if you stand up for a thing. So it's just, even though you believe in the thing, you're just not going to do it. Like, you're going to talk about something else. It's just too much work. It's too much emotional labor to go there. So I'm just not going to go there. And so you create this sort of phenomenon in the field that molds things in the interests of the Christian party, essentially, right? So, this field is definitely captured that way. And the Schmidt book passing peer review is just like the cherry on the cake of this. Is like, I think it's just done, basically. And so, like, and the way they treated me is I've got, objective third-party reviewers here pointing that out. No, that shows. We've got the false negative rate. We've got the false positive rate. It's a problem. It's a serious problem. And Richard said something earlier that reminded me of, I quote or cite Lester Grab. I wrote an article about this called The Corrupting Consensus. And I cite this in the book. And I feel like absolutely the peer reviewers just glossed right over this. I know they didn't read it, but Lester Grab was making the same complaint, the exact same complaint, like 10, 20 years ago or whatever, right? So he saw it, right? It was
Old
already,
Testament scholar?
It was Old Testament,
yeah.
He saw it already happening. And so now, of course, a lot of Old Testament scholars, especially oldies, know the Thomas Thompson affair. And, there's a lot of people have like revisionist history versions of what happened, but there are some who are like telling the truth about what really happened. And it's very similar to what's happening to me in that regard. So the only difference is that I found a way to make money without depending on the industry, so that they couldn't punish me the way they punished Thompson. I'm immune to their levers of influence and power. And that pisses them off, I think. I think it literally angers them. And so they look for any opportunity to gatekeep me and keep me out of the guild, essentially. And that's happening. And we have documentation of that happening. So
you kind of wonder if they had, I've thought if we had, maybe your own civilization isn't allowed to do the write-up of your own like sacred content, like you think of Tehran, like what's the odds of like University of Tehran that you're going to get an accurate, careful, proper description of the origins? Right. It's not forthcoming, and this kind of thing. And so if we all just kind of wrote up each other's religion instead, like.
Well, it's important to point out that the American industry, I'd say the Western industry generally, so we're going to include Canada, Europe, etc. And we have this happened to Ludeman, right? Like the same, like sort of trying to get him fired, yada yada. And he didn't even go as far as me. Like he just barely like moved like 10 inches. It was like a very small move, and it was enough. Like, how dare you? And they tried to destroy him, and it didn't work. But nonetheless, everybody sees that happen, right? And they say like, well, that happened to him, and I don't want to deal with the grief, etc. So that's still a reality. But the question is, so I don't know how to frame this. So like, what do we do, right? Like, I the best that I could do is this. I can just publish anyway, right?
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem publishing. And I don't have to self-publish. I have a real publisher and so on. And then make this point, and like, look, you're trying, like, the guild is trying to prevent you as a scholar from seeing this, right? They don't want you to read this book. Maybe then you should, right?
Yeah.
And if you should do it without this bias. Like, you're going in and saying, I absolutely am not I'm gonna find ways to refute this book. No, go into it saying like, I don't know, like, I'm gonna take it seriously. Like, does it make a case? And then if there's things in there that shock you and surprise you, like, that can't be true, do what I did, like, check, right? Like find out, like, say, like, I don't know, does this hold up? Did his critics really say that? Does what the critics say, is it actually false? Like, is that true? Like, are the things he's saying true? Or are his critics true, right? Like actually check, right? That's the thing that I would ask for scholars to do, is like don't trust your field to tell you the truth, because they're not gonna. Check. And if you believe they are going to tell you the truth, well, then it should be safe to check, because then you're going to find that they told the truth and I'm a liar.
You can easily falsify.
Right. Yeah. So the thing is it's too scary, right? It's too scary to do the work to check, because you don't want to know that it's your field that's lying to you, and that their field is corrupt. Like, that's a lot of shit to bear, right? That can be hard and difficult, especially if you're like banked your entire plan for your life is to be in the guild and to move up.
Yeah, you have to move up the ladder.
Right, yeah, to get hired, etc. Yeah,
you gotta fit in. You gotta swim with the rest of the fish in order to.
Well, and you don't want like the one thing I encountered when I was getting my PhD. So when I went into my PhD program, I had a sort of romantic view of professorships, like it's everybody's fantasy of what a professorship is. That sounds great. Like, you got a cool university campus and you're like teaching and whatever, and you can do research, paying you to do research. That's amazing. But by the time I finished my PhD, I had seen all the fucking politics and backstabbing and bullshit going on amongst all of my peers, right? All the professors. I was like, this is a terrible job. Like, would anybody want this? And it's not because it's low paid, which we also know it is now, because with adjuncting and so on, they've basically turned professorships into a below minimum wage job. And if people don't believe that, Google it. You'll find out that most teaching positions at the PhD level are worse than McDonald's, actually. The Alman Hillman case is a classic example. If you read the legal documents on his stuff, when you're learning him, when he describes what he was paid as a teacher at the college, and it's like, that's fucking criminal. Like, the low amount of money that he was paid as a professor of classics is literally like shocking. You're like, I literally make more money of that, like digging ditches in the rain, right? Like that's crazy. Anyway, so the industry is a problem. But it was that backstabbing politics shit that I was thinking, like, that like, you don't see that on the outside, and on the inside it's fucking miserable. Like, the amount of, like I said, emotional labor you have to engage in, the amount of stress, and it's unnecessary stress. Like, there's no reason to be arguing and fighting and machinating over who gets which office. Like, I want a better window, so I need to like slag off this guy so that I can get his office. And so, it's like all this politics and shit that really pissed me off. That's true in all fields, right? Now, add on top of that, basically the religious lobby, and you can see how bad it can be. I just don't know. It's got to be rough. And I know everyone here has experienced some of that and knows this.
I think with my book, it's difficult to, you've got people probably reading it, your work as well, guys, and it's threatening to their career to come out and say, hey, I found this work compelling.
Yeah. Yeah, literally just those like 4 words or whatever. Yeah, you can't even say that. Yeah, it's better to avoid it. And I've run into this a lot. There's a lot of scholars that they don't want to like destroy their integrity by slagging me off. Like, some will slag me off. Others know that they can't really do that because they know it's like, it's a decent work. It's actually a plausible theory or whatever. But they don't want to say that. And so they find ways to avoid answering the question, or they come up with some silly reason to be a historicist that has nothing to do with anything that I've argued and so on. And so that happens a lot. And there are a lot of like scholars that I respect. I think that they're really good, but I can see them, literally see them avoiding the debate. They want to avoid it. They want to run away. Like, I don't want to be pulled into that because my opinions will not be popular if I say them. Like, it'll cause so much trouble for me. And I've seen that happen. And I've had, like I said, scholars have literally told me this in private. So I know it's literally happening. It's not just me, my impression of it.
It's really weird to me. I mean, look, I've read a shit ton of work in 7 years. Okay. I'm not a PhD.
Yeah, I know. And you've interviewed a ton of scholars across,
yeah,
like more people than I've ever talked to in the field.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There's been a shit ton. And I think to myself, I'm sitting here thinking like I understand what their positions are. I've heard them, interviewed them, read the books, but then I'm also just looking at the New Testament. I've seen how much legend, how much theology, how much this, how much that. And I'm like, why isn't there more people who are at least going agnostic? I'm not even saying they need to be mythicists. Like, why is there not the neutral guy going, look, I just don't know, and I'm cool with not knowing? And more people go, dude, he's so heavily mythologized. I get why people might think there might have been a guy. I get why people don't think there's a guy, but I'm just going to sit here in the middle and just be more agnostic and say, I'm not sure if there's a guy, and the data, I don't give a shit about the politics. I don't care about the school, the pedigree, my reputation. The data points me in the direction of just going, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's got to be social pressure. It's got to be religion. It's got to be funding. It's got to be this. It's got to be moving up the ladder that's pushing them to go.
In support of that.
Agree with you guys. There's a guy. I agree. There's a guy.
Yeah.
Just to get along. I can't.
Yeah. I have an article about list of historians who take mythicism seriously. It's at about 42. And most of them are retired, which means that they're immune largely to this. And they're immune insofar as they don't give a shit anymore. If they're still publishing, then they're not immune. Because if they want to be taken seriously, if they want to still be accepted at the emeritus club or whatever for their college or whatever. But anyway, no, the point being is that there are a lot who will stand up for this, and some of them did so posthumously. Like they made admissions, then they died, and then we were able to talk about it later. So we have like the list. You go through the list, and the ones who aren't in those categories, they're either like it's posthumous admission or retired. They tend to be people who don't depend on the system, right? So if you look like someone who's gotten a job somewhere else, or someone whose their main focus is something different, so that they're not in a biblical studies department, so they can't be harmed directly. And so you can go through the list. You can actually research them all and see. And then some of them were like standard, ordinary acting professors, sitting professors, or whatever, that people just ignored. They just didn't listen to them, right? Like this, well, I'm just going to pretend he didn't say that, right? Like that kind of thing. And so that you get a list of people. So you can get a lot of, there's a lot, like dozens of people who've said, like you said, they're agnostic about this. Like, even if they're historicists, they're like weak historicists. They're like,
like the minimal.
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
Your whole thing is minimal to minimal. It's not maximal to maximal. It's minimum.
Well, I'm thinking like in terms of like they put the probability at like 80%, not 99%.
Right.
Like you're admitting a 1 in 5 chance that he didn't exist. Like they can't even handle that. Like they'll punish you for that, right? Like that's too far, right? It's a bridge too far. It's like even just
it's absurd. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So we're over 2 hours. I would like to.
I got some super chats too.
I was gonna. First of all, I was gonna ask if Richard and Aaron had anything else they wanted to talk about that they weren't able to yet. And then, like you said, yeah.
As much as I want to try to look at this whole thing historically in terms of the field itself, because go back to the early days of critical study of the Bible, and you got like David Friedrich Strauss. He comes out with his book questioning the stories of Jesus, and he immediately gets kicked out of his professorship. 20 years later, he's completely the consensus. So what did they not like? They didn't like his tone, basically. In fact, if you look at like the different editions of his Life of Jesus Critically Examined, he basically says, I tried softening up in this issue or in this tome, and then he came back to the 4th edition and said, fuck you all, I'm going back to what I originally said, because I think that was right in the first place.
Yeah.
And we see the same things like, what we mentioned with Thomas Thompson, basically having to take painting jobs for like a decade and then having to go to another continent to finally get like stable employment in his work. And I was just reminding myself, it was a little more than 10 years ago that Christopher Rolston, who's probably one of the top paleographers in the world, lost his position because he wrote what's mainstream biblical studies in things like the Huffington Post. And his seminary basically said, hey, our donors are coming in. They don't like you anymore. We know you're tenured, but goodbye. That's the kind of field that we're dealing with, that it has to come kicking and screaming to its positions and against faith and moneyed positions. And this is not normal for other fields. I don't see this in physics. I don't see this in popular culture studies. This is particular to this area, and imagine it'd be the same thing if we were in Saudi Arabia doing Quranic studies. In fact, I've also read recently of Plato studies in China basically having to embrace Strauss's ideas that there's hidden messages to basically lie through their teeth in their scholarship because they can't say what they really think within China.
Yeah.
So like that's the kind of sort of thing I see. And if you deny it, I'm sorry, it's just, that's the history of this field. Also a few anecdotes for myself. One of the recent articles I wrote on trying to apply some math to a math problem, in that because I've been diving deep into the Exodus story, coming out with a book with my co-author, side thing popped out as like these attempts to try to make the Exodus story not so big, because you go to Exodus and it says at least 600,000 army age men left there, and you realize, you do the math, that's just the men, take the women and children. The population of Egypt in total basically had to leave and live in the desert for 40 years. No, this doesn't make any sense. So this physicist argues in an actual peer-reviewed biblical studies journal. He's got a mathematical model to say it's not millions of people, it was maybe 20,000. Well, I can math too. I think I proved that earlier today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also had some help. So if I can give a shout out, Kip Davis, I know we have some differences here, but he actually helped me earlier with the article to make sure I was getting the Hebrew right on some grammar points, showing that I got that correct. And I, went to the original journal that published this. They said, we don't publish these things anymore. I go to another journal, said, we don't publish stuff, go back to the original journal. And I'm like, guys, I'm going in circles.
Yeah.
I finally get it reviewed by another place, and they said, there's math in here. I don't want to learn the math. I finally get a home for it. And ultimately, why is it taking so long for this thing to get published? While the other physicsy, sciencey, mathy paper got through, it gave a result that people liked. Oh, we don't have to throw out the Exodus story anymore. I come along and say, hey, I can prove how they faked the numbers.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a good paper, by the way, too. I've read it. It's fascinating, and goes
The best
into
paper, the best paper in the world. Everyone should read it 10 times. It's free.
Yeah.
And I can see Kip Davis's, like, the one thing he does well is in, like, the imprint is on that article in terms of, like, the Hebrew and so on.
Yeah. I've learned just enough Hebrew that I thought I was mostly right, but I checked with an actual expert that said, yeah, you're not tripping over your own shoelaces.
Yeah.
Is there anything from you, Richard?
No, I think we've hit a lot of points here. Yeah. This is a great discussion. I think, like I said, I'd like to invite others to stand in solidarity. If you're concerned over the threats to secularism in our field, come join us. Stand with us. Let's go to Super Chat.
Stop denying that this is happening and admit it. And then I don't know if there's anything you can do about it, but you can at least admit it and acknowledge it.
Maybe normalize being someone who's sympathetic, even if you don't agree, or if you agree. I mean, obviously I don't want someone to lose their career, but that's the sad state of this damn thing, is you can't even be.
And that's why this works. Most people don't have the power to prevent this. Right, like this, no one can help us. Basically, there's no, they've so thoroughly captured the system that the ordinary person, who'd be watching this show, has no power to do anything about it. You can't. There's no vote you can make. There's no dollar you can spend. There's literally nothing you can do to change the state of things.
I would also say one last thing. I think that I read the book. And this is me being as sincere as possible here on this, not just saying it because we're on here to promote a book. It's your best work, I think, Richard. I think there are points in there where you really have honed and refined kind of your way of articulating what's going on, and I think it's some of your best writing. And so, hope people get a chance to read it soon. Do you have an idea of when it drops?
It's already available for pre-order on Amazon, so people can already basically put their order in and get it. And you can find that, and there's a link under the video. You can find it through my website, whatever. And yeah, thank you for saying that, because I feel it. And I always wonder, like, I don't know, am I being gaslit by the reviewers? Like, what's going on? No, I feel that. Like, I feel like all of the stuff that I've learned over the last 10 years, well, honestly, 25 years really, came to fruition in this book. Like, this book is like the culmination of this work. And yeah, I have perfected everything in this. And so, I do feel like it's my best work to date. Yeah, certainly on this subject. On the historicity of Jesus is good. Jesus from Outer Space is good. But this is like kind of like the definitive capstone right now. So I feel like, yeah. And for, as I mentioned before, like, if you really care about this subject, you got to read this book, because, a lot has happened in the last 10 years. And there's a lot of things that weren't really covered, I think, evidently, properly, on the historicity of Jesus that I cover in this. So I do think it's a really important book. And I do think scholars especially need to read it, because if you're buying the excuses that are being made for why you shouldn't read it, you really should not be falling for that. I think this is a voice and a point that scholars need to hear. And I think they're running away from it. They don't want to hear it, but I do think they need to hear it. And there's a lot in here that is not what all the, like, terrorists, the sort of ideological terrorists that are saying, you don't want to read this. There's all this crap stuff in this. It's all colloquial bullshit. There's nothing new, yada, yada. Don't listen to that. No, it's literally like, there's some stuff that you would be really interested to read. Even if you disagree with it, you will find it useful. Like, there's just so much, like, so many things covered in this book that you're going to find useful. Even if you're a historicist and want to defend the historicity of Jesus, this is the book for you. Like, you've got, like, this is what you got to meet. This is the level you got to get to defend the historicity of Jesus. And I really want someone to do that. Like, someone
really good.
Yeah. Like Mark Goodacre, or even Robin Walsh, like it's somebody who can do this and say, like, yeah, okay, all right, got it. And take it seriously, not rage skim it, which I think they wouldn't. Like,
yeah,
I don't think Walsh or Goodacre would rage skim something. I think they would take it seriously. And then write the challenge book, like, write the peer-reviewed monograph that is pro-historicity, that makes your best case. And I do wonder if they don't do that because they think they can't, that there's no case, you can't do it. And you don't want to admit that you can't do it. And I make that point throughout the book at several points. And people can see it's not just something I throw out there. Like, yeah, I make that point after surveying a bunch of examples where you go, like, oh, I think you might be right. So, but if you don't believe me, you got to read the book, because then that's where all the receipts are, right? Yeah. So anyway, that's my personal take on my own book, I guess. But it is gratifying to hear people, like, react to it the same way that I felt about it. Like, I do feel that same way.
Awesome. Guys, I'm going to get super chats real quick, and then we can be off to enjoying our evening. Brian, thank you for becoming a member of Myth Vision. We appreciate you joining the family. Solera Knight, thank you for being a member and the super chat. Should mythical Luke Skywalker, as good versus evil, temptation, and redemption, be treated as same genre as the emerging mythical Jesus? War Scrolls, Sons of Light against the Sons of Dark Forces?
Yeah, I'm waiting for 1,000 years from now, where the warring factions of Skywalkerites are like the ones who are saying, no, he bodily resurrected, and like, no, it was a Force ghost, and they're like literally fighting a war over this. Yeah, it's
Richard, that's not true. That's impossible.
Right? These are not cleverly devised Luke Skywalker myths.
But it can't be a ghost if he sat and had dinner with us. It's like, but that didn't happen. Like, yeah. Yes, it did in the tale of so and so. But
oh my god. Yeah, thank you, Solera. Seth HDK, high quality THC and a Bibler. Okay, thanks, Seth.
I guess it's a self description.
I think so. Yeah. Solera Knight, thank you again. Why most religions centered around murdered kings?
Interesting.
More
I
drama?
guess it'd be ancient religions, not more recent I haven't really thought about that. So I don't know if that's really true statistically. It is true that there are a few.
Yeah.
And so, this comes into the thing that's often denied. Like, there's this constant apologetic claim that there's no such thing as dying, rising gods. And everybody it's just like, who says this? Where do you get this? And they always say Jonathan Z. Knight, right? Like
Jonathan Z.
Smith.
Yeah, yeah.
Jonathan C. Smith. And so, like, yeah, but that book was terrible. It didn't address hardly, like, 99% of the evidence is not even discussed in that book. But they don't, and how dare you slag off Jonathan Z. Smith? And it's
Right.
like, no, and just objectively the case. That's like 99% of the evidence is not in that book. Like, he doesn't discuss it. And this is one of the things that happens in Paradigm. So, like, Obsolete Paradigm, this is one of the things that's changed in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, everybody was citing Jonathan C. Smith. It's done. There's no dying and rising God myth. It's been refuted, yada, yada. The consensus is completely flipped. So now in the last 10 years, every single study published on this has concluded that Smith was wrong. Everyone. Like, there's a whole bunch of them. Like, nope, there's tons of evidence of dying and rising gods. Every argument Smith made was bogus. And, it's like there's actual, several scholars specifically refuting Smith. There's several scholars ignoring Smith and just presenting the evidence. Like, it's just, the state of the field has changed in the last 10 years. And there's a tendency to, cite, this happens especially with Christian apologists. They look, like, the current state of scholarship does not support them. So they look past, they go back. And they go back. Sometimes they have to go back 100 years to find a scholar who agrees with them. And then they say, and then so-and-so said, and like, that dude's been dead for 100 years. Like, why are you citing him? Why are you skipping over all the other scholarship on this? So anyway, the point being is that this is one of the things that Paradigm does, is that it covers what's happened in the last 10 years. And one of the things is that every study, literally every study on the dying and rising God myth theme is all pro. And there's a lot. It's not a few. So, and if you were told otherwise, the people who told you that either don't know what they're talking about or are lying. And so you need to be aware of that. And that's one of the values of the book, is that it catches you up on the reality. So, like, you can't be, gaslit or ghosted on this. So anyway, that's, but that gets to the murdered kings thing. There's why that is. That's a whole other interesting question. But I think the field has to admit that it is before you can have scholars doing dissertations on why.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you can think like this opposition, this sort of Christian apologetical opposition, even if it's coming from secular scholars, is impeding scholarship. It's blocking and preventing progress. So, like, I think really great studies could be done on the why question. Why is that the case? Why are there all these dying and rising gods? I think that would be a fresh and useful avenue for study. But if you can't even admit that it's a thing to be explained, you're never going to allow your dissertation student to do that. Like, as soon as they propose, I want to do a dissertation on this, you say, no, don't do that. It'll kill your career. Well, then it never gets done, right? So, like, it's this kind of impediment. And this gets to the whole idea of obsolete paradigm. Like, the paradigm is getting in the way of progress in scholarship. And in the book, I give several examples of how it's getting in the way. It's preventing us getting to things like admitting what the evidence for Docetism really suggests. It's getting in the way of actually asking why were certain stories in the Gospels told the way they are. It's getting in the way of studying, like, what did Paul actually mean when he said certain things? It's blocking progress and knowledge, and that has to stop.
That actually fits this next. Explain obsolete paradigm. Because your point is, when you read those sections, and I'm not going to give any of the details away, but just to say that, it's the same thing you were saying about presuming he exists. Now we're going to find data that somehow matches our starting conclusion. And so we're used to starting with Gnosticism explanations or docetic explanations. And you're saying, no, we got to peel the layers back and re-investigate from the ground up.
Those are good examples, by the way.
Is that what you mean by obsolete?
So, let's get to paradigm. What is a paradigm, right? So what happened to Gnosticism is, let's stick with that because that's kind of settled now. I know there's a lot of scholars who don't, like, Luke Skywalker clinging to the thing saying, no, that's impossible. But nonetheless, it happened. Basically what the mainstream scholarly track has been is to admit that Gnosticism was a modern fabrication and that it was impeding and causing misinterpretation of ancient evidence. It was impeding progress in understanding early Christianity. And so that's a paradigm. The assumption that Gnosticism is a thing causes you to see all the evidence as being evidence of Gnosticism. And consequently, you don't think about what that actually is, right? So you're misinterpreting the evidence because you're seeing it through this lens of this paradigm, and so you're getting wrong results because you're making the wrong assumptions in how you interpret things. Same thing happens with Docetism. Like there's been this, like the Docetism studies field has admitted this. Like we've been looking through the wrong glasses. We've been seeing all the evidence wrong because we've been following this paradigm, this assumption of what Docetism is, and we'll do a whole show on Docetism later, but that's a paradigm. And so an obsolete paradigm is when the paradigm just turns out to just not be true anymore. And that's true for Docetism. It's like, we got to get rid of that. Like Gnosticism, that's a wrong label. It's misleading us. We got to get rid of that. And, you know, the famous, you talk about Kuhn and all these other famous writers who are talking about paradigms in terms, like, I'm not completely endorsing everything Kuhn said about the idea of paradigms in science. But the idea of when you transition from geocentrism to heliocentrism, there was a tremendous amount of resistance. There's a lot of astronomers that said, no, it can't be true. It can't be true. And so they were seeing all the data through this paradigm of geocentrism. But if you look at it this way, it all makes sense. And they were resisting the new paradigm of heliocentrism. And I'm not comparing myself to Galileo or any of that shit, but it's just an example of how a paradigm shifted. And that was usually the typical one. But you can go through like how we got rid of ether theory, how we changed our view of light and electromagnetism. And there's been, you know, in sciences, you can find many examples. You can also find them in history. So like you look through biblical history, there was the idea that the Moses story was totally true. And we should interpret the biblical text in terms of it being like, what is a rational explanation for crossing, like parting the Red Sea? Well, maybe there was a weather event, yada, yada. That's a paradigm, right? Once you reject the paradigm of, oh, it really happened and we need to figure out a rational explanation for it, then you realize, oh, it's just made up, right? That's a whole new paradigm. Like, oh, it's just a myth that they made up hundreds of years later. There was no one there. And that allows you to reinterpret the evidence in terms of like, well, then if they were making it up hundreds of years later, what were they doing? Why did they do this? Why is this passage here? Why was this story here? What does this do? You're allowed to ask new questions that can actually lead to progress in knowledge and understanding the Bible, right? And that's how a paradigm shift is needed to do that. And it's happened many times in biblical studies. I do an example. I wrote an example. My specific, like the field that I was trained up in was ancient science. And so I did an article on how I lived through a paradigm change in this. When I started my graduate school at Columbia University, the paradigm was very much what's called primitive economy. The Roman Empire was a primitive economy. It didn't have any sophisticated economic vehicles or anything like this. And it was very like their technology was basic. They didn't have industrialization. They didn't have manufacturing, yada, yada. And then by the time I got my PhD, this is only 10 years, right? By that time, like the paradigm had shifted and there's a flood of scholars came out and said, no, the paradigm's wrong. The economy was super sophisticated. They had tons of cool shit that we didn't know they had, yada, yada. And I wrote an article about this on my blog and you can read it. And you can see how, like, when you change the paradigm, it changes, like you have access to evidence that you were blocking yourself away from it looking at. And so you can actually make progress in the field. You can actually understand better things that happen, whole events that happened in the Roman Empire. The fall of the Roman Empire cannot be properly understood unless you understand what happened in the 2nd century in terms of the economic and technological progress of the 2nd century. If you're denying it, you're just not going to understand what happened in the 3rd century, right? So like it matters, right? So the paradigm change matters. And so that's the idea of obsolete paradigm. And with Jesus studies, it's like, how do we study the epistles? How do we study the gospels? We need to stop asking the questions that are based on historicism and start asking the questions that follow from mythicism, which are different and interesting questions. And I talk about this in the book. I give examples. It's all covered in there.
Thank you. Branko S, thank you for that super chat, my friend. I really appreciate the support. Robert Rice, thank you for the 20. The harassment of Dr. Carrier behind the scenes is ridiculous. The critics should address your arguments with evidence and arguments. You might have to name names to hold people accountable, compel them to make an argument.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the names, so I can't really do that.
Yeah, I
that's the whole point of a secret, like, backroom maneuvers.
Well, I know names. We all know names of people who publicly, or at least tried to go after you.
You have the journalism problem that you don't want to burn a source because then you don't get sources anymore.
Well,
so.
yeah, there's that issue,
Yeah.
but then there's the other issue of some people have actually just vocally in groups tried to like slander you and literally ruin your name.
Certainly, you can find that online. That's not even public. You can go find the people who say bullshit.
Yeah, but some of these people have actually tried to critique you in your work, and you've
Well, that's also true. Yeah. You can
So-
find that on my blog.
Solara Knight, thank you for the super chat and being a member. Does nature have obsolete paradigms, or is this just a human construct with an ever evolving perspectives within technology and discovery?
Yeah, paradigms is just how humans try to understand the world. It's not it has nothing to do with objective reality outside of our understanding.
Okay. Thank you for that. Kevin Maxwell in the house. Can mythicism bring us a more fulfilling life? Thank you for the super chat.
Actually, I think you're better positioned to answer that question because you're talking about how people can let go of toxic beliefs that lead to bad decisions once they're willing to let go of the thing that is blocking their progress morally and ethically and so on. And so I don't think it's true that we can refute Christianity with mythicism. I think it's a bad argument because it's low probability. It's a weak argument. There are better ways to refute Christianity. But if you do, like if you're an honest person who's really open to evidence and reason, and you're like a rational person and so on, and you're convinced by this, you're like, you know what, actually this looks pretty weak. Like the evidence for historicity is weak. Then you might be in a position to finally realize that Christianity isn't true. And then that opens up the question of, well, then what is true, right? And so now you're actually going to start exploring the information space of much more plausible worldviews that can actually help you better things about your life, even your personal life, freaking relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell stories. I don't want to because I don't want to tell people's private lives. But I've had people come up to me and tell me their stories about how, and this relates to my resurrection apologetics, not my historicity stuff. But by convincing them the resurrection is ridiculous and there's no reason they should have believed it, and that more importantly, that the apologists who are trying to tell them they should believe it are lying to them or gaming, they realize it's just bullshit, right? And so oh my God, if there's the only way to defend resurrection of Jesus is with bullshit, what am I even doing? Right? And so they change. And so I've had people that were hardcore fundamentalists and we're all in on the politics that entailed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then realize oh my God, this is all I've been lied to. This is all bullshit. Then they start exploring what is true, and then they end up adopting much better views of their own personal life, their own relationships, their own politics, and make the world better for other people because they're voting better. That's how it could have an effect. I don't think that this is the most efficient way to have that effect. I think it's really just a trivial debate over, some random historical subject. It's like, was the 2nd century Roman Empire's economy primitive or complex? That's not going to change the world, right? The answering that question is not going to change the world, but it does matter, right? It's important. Historians, as the memory cells of society, do need to get these things right. We can't be gaslighting the world. So it does matter, but it's not the most important shit in the world. There's more important things.
Thank you.
If I could add to that a little bit,
sure.
even within the paradigm of being a Christian, I could imagine a mythicist view actually becoming fulfilling because, one, if you're stuck with the literalness of the Bible and the things that Jesus says that you might find objectionable in the 21st century, saying that, hey, these are tropes, these are interpretations, this is the politics of the 1st or 2nd century, and you realize if ultimately these are the creations of basically what people imagined, or what they thought was being spoken to them by Jesus through some other means, if that opens up the possibility of thinking you can hear Jesus in a new way, I could see even within a mythicist Christian paradigm, this being more fulfilling. So I wouldn't even say necessarily you have to go full atheist, even though that's, of course, where I'm at.
Really good
physically.
And I'm glad you made that point. Yeah. Because I do think if you want to support, I'm going to tell a brief anecdote here. So I used to give seminars to Christian high school students. This is a long story. And I was the token atheist who was brought in to what I would do is I would say some atheist thing, and then I'd leave, and then the pastors or whatever would try to inoculate the students against everything they were just told. The students never bought it, right? So what I would be told, like behind the scenes, like, you know, they would come to me and say, like, they would complain, like, these are a lot of these like devout Christian students would say, like, we don't care about like the gay rights thing. We don't want to like make lives difficult for gay people. We don't care about the abortion issue. That's not our problem. Like, we want to do Jesus-y things. Like, that was the exact quote, that we want to do Jesus-y things. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, we want to like help the poor and like feed the homeless. And, you know, it's like, okay, I get that. Right. And so they're hungry to do these like moral, humanistic things, but the fundamentalist literalist paradigm is in their way. Right. So it's absolutely, you're spot on that this is a true thing, that you could go from this ridiculous fundamentalist literalist paradigm and jump to mythicism, because this is important. Like, what I point out is that this is what the original Christians, the devout, willing to die for their faith Christians, believed, was that this all happened in the sky. It had sort of metaphysical significance to us, but really it matters in terms of how we treat each other. And, you know, it's very communistic, actually, which is, you know, why the evangelicals don't like this story. But the point being is, if you want to do Jesus-y things, it's easier to do that believing in the celestial Jesus rather than the earthly Jesus, because then you have permission to let go the Gospels as literal history, and you can start asking, well, this is all symbolic. What is it symbolic of? And then you can start interpreting in terms of what is the message of this, etc. And I think there's a positive direction you can go in that would improve your own life, especially if you're gay or any kind of non-standard person, but also like just in terms of how you treat your neighbors, how you treat your society, and so on. Like, you absolutely could go more. You could defend a liberal Christian view with the mythicist model, the Doherty thesis. You could just believe it's true. And one of the things I point out in Obsolete Paradigm is part of the scholarship that's like rejecting Docetism is, one of the things they're admitting is that they're looking at it this way. Like, they say that there's a conflict between the revelationists and the traditionalists. And the traditionalists are the one who are saying, well, we have a pedigree to the apostles and this stuff really happened, and you have to kowtow to what really happened. And the revelationists are saying, no, that's all myth. We are literally talking to Jesus right now, and he says you're wrong. And I have no reason to believe that you're right, because fucking Jesus trumps you, right? And so they're literally like this revelationist. And you can see this in Tertullian, like his attack on the Montanists, because he used to be one, but then he became an anti-Montanist for probably sexist reasons. That's a whole other story. But it's the same thing, where they were still receiving original revelation. It's like, we can't have that. Then any Joe Blow can come in and have a revelation and say we're wrong. We can't control society if we allow democratic knowledge of what Jesus wants. And so this movement towards historicism and against mythicism was very much couched in this framework of that the history is fixed, therefore historianism fixes what's true and what the doctrine is. Whereas if you allow it to be celestial, then now it's your own personal relationship with Jesus, and Jesus trumps your pastor. He trumps the Bible. Like, if Jesus tells you something, well, fuck them, because Jesus is right. Now, this can lead to disaster. I've written about this. Like, this can be a bad way of looking at things, but it does give you a permission to get away from things, right? So you can actually say, like, fuck the evangelicals. Jesus says I should feed the homeless, and then you feed the homeless, right? Like, so, like, with a mythicist model, you can actually create a legitimate Christian faith that is actually good for humanity and not hobbling of humanity.
A couple more here, and then I know Rick Miller's got to head out here. Great minds think different. Thank you for the super sticker. I really appreciate that. And then Hella, thank you for the super chat. Hella asked a question, but the question wasn't there.
Oh,
my question was, did he at least Google, and we got to be careful because we're live.
Okay.
Vag drugs before he made an article that says vag drugs exist?
No, to be clear, I'm responding only to Amon Hillman. I'm not looking into whether you can use drug suppositories today in genital areas. Obviously you can. I mean, people are fucking like pumping alcohol up their ass, literally. So yeah, no, obviously that can happen. The question is, was that happening in early Christianity? And the answer is no. I don't even think any of that stuff was happening outside Christianity, frankly. They were doing drugs for sure, but not everybody was doing drugs. Drugs like Aristotle, Plato, they were not doing drugs and having hallucinatory things that are deciding their philosophies. That wasn't happening. But there were, like, people had hallucinogens, they understood them, people were using them and so on. So it was real, but that's the it relates to a talk we have. It's not going to come up in this, but about Mott and Bailey, the question of the strong argument versus the weak argument. The strong argument is, they knew about drugs, they used them, etc. The weak argument is everybody was using drugs and it caused everything. That's not true.
There's an obsession to that stuff. Last one. Thank you so much, Joel Pearson. Did Mark believe in a celestial Jesus?
So unknown, because Mark is writing allegorically, so he doesn't give us a straight prose description of what he believed. I suspect he did. The reason is that he's clearly a Pauline. And I have an article citing the scholarship, and this is also in Paradigm. The book cites the scholarship too, of the fact that Mark is very much reifying the epistles of Paul. So it's basically taking stories that Paul told and turning them into stories about Jesus, which they didn't start that way. Which suggests to me that Mark is very much doing a particular thing that we know others were doing at the time. And I point out this example of Plutarch talks about Osiris cult did this, which is, there's the idea, there's the secret story, but then there's the public story. The public story all happened on earth, but the secret story all happened in heaven. I personally think Mark is doing that. Can I prove it? No, I can't prove it. I don't know exactly what Mark thought because he doesn't tell us, actually. But you can interpret everything Mark does in the context of Paul's view. That is what I argue. So yeah, I think he probably believed in a celestial Jesus.
Thank you so much. Okay, last shameless plug, fam. Get the obsolete. Let me share my screen here, and then we are going to wrap things up and dip out. Share screen. Boom, boom, boom. Window. All right. Make sure you get the book. Pre-order right now. Go ahead and grab it. It's a great book. Get Richard C. Miller's book, Resurrection and Reception in Early Christianity.
Also a good book, yeah.
Yep. And Aaron Adair, amazing.
Yeah.
All three. Again, everybody, they have websites that are down in the description. Both of them, go check them out. Final words from you guys. We'll start with you, Rick. What would you like to say as we leave?
I just hope that there's a better conversation coming in terms of progress in the right direction here. I'm excited to see this book. And nonetheless, the reviewers did their best to try and destroy your spirits, and who knows what their objective was. What kind of shitty human being? But anyway, I don't know. Why do that with your life? But anyway, I hope that in the future, it looks like your book's prevailing. It's coming out, it's being published. Folks are going to get it. And of course, there's the truth that probably you're selling more books and are more famous than all of your reviewers combined, but we won't talk about that further. And it's exciting to see this work getting out there. And so I applaud you, Richard, for championing this for so long. You've gone it for, what is it now, 20 years or whatever. And it's exciting to see you continuing to publish, strong, field paradigm shifting, disruptive work that is contributing to the field, because you really are you're working as a theorist in the field, which is going to be disruptive, and you've got a bold effort to do that, and a bold claim that's being proposed. And I think it needs to be taken a lot more seriously. I've personally benefited a lot from your work. And so thank you for, it's probably thankless, you've got fans that are under you, but there's a lot of people in the field though, that I think are benefiting from the fact that you're forging through, you're moving forward with this, you're driving it. It's causing people to have to think about a number of questions that would otherwise be neglected.
Yeah, no,
the field owes you a debt, whether they're telling you this or not. And so anyway, proud to be on the show.
Aaron?
Thank you, Rick. I first want to reiterate, thank you for having me here. And I want to iterate a key thing about the title, The Obsolete Paradigm, that paradigm part. If historical Jesus studies are going to be replaced as a paradigm, if it's Carrier's or anyone else's, that is to be determined. And when it comes to my own New Testament studies, I've been actually trying to use that paradigm to actually inform and create my scholarship. I have multiple articles in the works right now based on that kind of paradigm. So can we actually make progress there, or is it just a screed against Christians? I think it's the former. And I think the best way to find out how fruitful it is to engage with it, whether to build from it or refute it. But to ignore it is to basically hobble any chance that historical Jesus studies is a field that we should be paying attention to and funding.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. We did have a final. If you want to hit this real quick, I don't want to leave the stragglers hanging.
Well, I'm going to throw this one, but go ahead. I'm going to throw it to another video, but go.
Yeah. Why do Bible scholars claim the testimony of Josephus is proof of a historical Jesus instead of proof that Christianity existed in 95 CE?
Yeah. Oh God, that's a well-worded question too. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, this is the official position I take, is that it doesn't matter whether it's authentic or not, right? So like there's this sort of distracted argument about whether it's authentic or not. But even if it's authentic, it's clearly based on the Gospels, and therefore it is not independent evidence. So all it does prove is that the Gospels existed in 95, which we know, no one doubts this, like no one's challenging that. So yeah, you're right. Like this is the point. It's like the Testimonium Flavianum in Josephus really just tells us, like, even if it was authentic, it just tells us that Christianity was going and they had these stories circulating then. It doesn't tell us whether Jesus existed. And I made that point in my original study. I talk about it again in the new study and so on. But there's a whole lot going on in the field of this now. There's a new sort of super apologetical Oxford study that's pushing the Testimonium Flavianum. And like I said, my article's dropping on that tomorrow. It's going to piss a lot of people off. It's going to be scandalous. So we will shoot a video on this, and it'll come up at some point. But yeah that's happening. So
I'd like to do also, just for all you Ammonites, I see a lot of people who are fans of Ammon.
That's also blowing up. Yeah,
we're going to do a video. We're recording one here. I want to get your take on the article and stuff. So too bad he won't debate you. Just saying. Anyway, love y'all. Thank you for both of you showing up and everybody in the chat.
Genuinely, thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate your friendship and your insight, your knowledge, taking the time, Aaron, to do the math there. Richard, you've dealt with this for a while. Let's do more panels like this.
Yeah.
All right.
See you guys.
Never, ever, ever forget. We are Myth Vision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.